every game, every engine, by the time PS6 ships, has this as a feature. And then what the biggest difference is between a console and the handheld is going to be resolution targets.
Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom. This episode is brought to you by FlexiSpot and their swivel rocker recliner Lotus chair. You are supporting the channel directly if you just go down to the description now and click that link to check it out. And you can get it $30 off if you like it with offer code Lotus30. And then it is also brought to you by Micro Center. Go to the myriad of links in the description to get everything from a free USB to the best deals on the latest hardware. And then it is also brought to you by the ThermalMaster P3 camera. Check out that through the links in the description as well, and we will talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. And you know, it's actually funny. I've actually been pretty exhausted with the pace of output I've had over the past 2 months. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do this PS6 leak that I did last week. I honestly might want to just take a week off. But I'd already scheduled an episode with the guest who is on right now. I can't think of a better person to have on to give their opinion on the next-gen consoles, next-gen graphics cards. And so, Bryan, it was all for you that I pushed myself to get that done, because I'm like, what, am I not going to have the AI stuff out so he can talk about it? But please introduce yourself. You've been on half a dozen times by now, I believe.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I've been on. Somewhere like 8 or something.
It actually might be almost 10, yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, thank you. It's quite the praise coming from you. I love games. I've worked in games. I've been working on games, I think, for almost 15 years now, which is crazy to think. So, you know, worked mobile, worked console stuff, handhelds, whatever. Like, touched a lot of games, seen a lot of different engines running, done art assets for basically everything, pixel art, 2D, 3D, whatever. So, you know, I've just been around the bush. I've been to all of the major cons over and over and over again, you know, GDC, Unreal Fest, whatever, Bit Summit, meeting lots of game devs, having lots of interesting conversations. And I guess I'm usually considered uniquely obsessed with art and hardware, like kind of where those two things meet each other. So, anyways, I typically have a really good time talking to people and standing out at those kind of places. So that's me.
Yeah, and I mean, just to summarize again for people who maybe haven't heard one of the episodes you're on, because there are always new listeners. I mean, not only are you a game dev at Massive Damage Inc., and specifically, I believe you're the lead art director, right?
Yeah, I'm the art director there. So I'm the only art director. So anything visual, running teams or whatnot comes through me.
But yeah, so you have a lot of interest in the art itself, but then unlike where I'll have on like a tools engineer and they just care about how you make the game, I had on someone actually who works, I'm trying to remember, I think they work at Infinity Ward now. Before they worked at Sony Santa Monica. This is someone that made the explosions. All they want to know is, does it have enough teraflops and RAM to make fire appear? You know, you are interested in holistically everything that goes into a gaming console or PC and the art, and you go to conferences like you said and speak to other devs. So I mean, that's why I love having you on anytime there's really, whether it's a CPU, a GPU, a console, any big revelation in upcoming hardware, because I think you're uniquely capable of talking about it in a digestible way as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, so in general, I think like one of the weird things about me is sometimes I can problem solve like a problem before it comes out by just imagining it. So a developer will suggest a solution for something, and then my head will be like, let's say they're whatever, like, oh, let's render to a separate camera and it does this and this, like, and then I'm like, well, wouldn't that cause a delay? So it'll always happen off screen, and I'll say something like that before they implement it, and they're like, oh, you're right, and then they just don't go down that path because immediately it's like they were about to spend like a week developing a tool or a feature and it would have probably not worked. So, you know, I guess it's just strange to kind of have conversations like that where you can problem solve visually how things are being done rendering wise or tech wise, and then kind of distill it to a digestible form or see problems before they arise, kind of thing. So
Nolan writes in and says, "Hey Bryan, I try to keep my questions to just one, but I had to ask this one in addition to another one later. I saw that you launched a Kickstarter. I'd love to hear more about the game that you're working on, and it is one you've sent stuff to me about too."
this is just like it's a side thing. I personally miss Mega Man. Like I love that series. If even if let's say you were saying, "Hey, let's come on the podcast or whatnot," and you say I'll take an hour, I typically beat a Mega Man game while I'm waiting for something like that. It's just how I play. I have like my entire collection of all of them over here and whatnot. And when we were kids, like I used to, me and my brothers, we would play through the old ones, and we tried every boss order possible. We had like this big thing where you had all the passwords, and then we were writing down the password for every possible order you could fight the bosses in for it. And but ultimately, once you did realize there was no point to it. There was no point in beating the bosses in any particular order and whatnot. So I just had an idea for a game that where you can essentially date all the bosses, but you can only date one per playthrough. And I thought it opened up
That
the map.
changes how you play the rest
Yes.
of the
So
game.
you might need to get something from another stage before you can date the particular boss on another stage. But once you date one, that's for a playthrough. So it incentivizes you playing every possible order over and over again. So it was kind of an idea where you take this map screen that opens up all of this potential, but in Mega Man, it kind of closed potential the more you played it. And I just always saw more potential in it than what was used in the game. So I thought it would be fun to work on that. And the idea made me laugh a lot. Like, so I said this to you
And by the way,
before.
the game's called Radiant Starlets, right?
Yeah.
I'll have Gerard put some pictures of this on
Yeah,
screen
it's
so they
it's
can see
called
the
Radiant
pixel art.
Starlets. It's running on it's on Kickstarter. Follow it on Steam, whatnot. I mean, I don't know how any of it will do. It's just a side project for me and a couple of devs that I've worked with. But the situation is just that I want to make several games before I die. I want to make a Mega Man style game. I want to make a Metroidvania. I want to make a horror game. I want to make what else? A horror game, a tactics game, a JRPG, and yeah, in general, I love good video games, and I wanted to touch all of the main genres that I care about before I went. So that's the game. Feel free to check it out on Kickstarter, back it on that, or wishlist it on Steam if you're interested. I'm not typically one for uh, promoting games that aren't up your genre. So please, if it seems like the kind of game you might like, feel free. But obviously, that's kind of where I'm thinking there. And also if someone sees it that's, a publisher or whatnot that's interested, feel free to reach out. You can Google me or you can email me at brianheemskerk@gmail. I'd be happy to, talk to anyone who might be interested in this project or, another project with me. And this is outside of my work with Massive Damage. I still work, full time there. So it's just, evenings and whatnot. I just had a bunch of games in my heart that I wanted to slowly make progress on.
But this is especially why I like having people like you on. And by the way, everyone, there will be links in the description to that. But you make games. You don't sit in the comments and say devs are lazy or this is that or that doesn't work, and then just rely on, kind of people guessing on Reddit on what's going on, or if something should actually, like, if a game's not running as well as people wanted, maybe there's a good reason for that. And so let's start here. And I want to start here because this is something that I've actually played a lot over the past few days. So I have a stake in caring about what's going on. And I also think I have a more nuanced opinion than some of the opinions I've seen online, but I think I usually do about game performance. Borderlands 4, everyone is actually this is kind of blowing up as a big conversation. This is like the new thing for like a tech commenter talking head I've noticed to get easy clicks, is just freak out about Borderlands 4. But I have to say, I've played it extensively on PS5 Pro. I've had zero crashes. It mostly runs at a lock 60. There are some drops to 50 frames per second, though, every now and then. And I think it actually looks very good, but could obviously be smoother. And my input, and something I've said to my friends while we're playing, is, so I've seen people say it doesn't look better than Borderlands 3. If you say that, you probably shouldn't have a driver's license, because, I mean, like, it looks substantially better than Borderlands 3, especially when it comes to detail. And that's what I think is partially what's going on here. I've noticed the view distances are incredibly large, the foliage distances. It's not like, playing some games where the grass shifts with your horse as you're moving. Like, at least on PS5 Pro, which there's many PCs stronger than that. I think the foliage that they give you is way more than most games would. There's not a lot of popping, I've noticed, and it's very sharp. It's with tons of detail. Like I can just shoot on the ground, it bounces. There's all of this grass and foliage and like holograms instead of simple menus. And I think that's what's hurting half of the reason the performance is bad is it's like, I don't know, you pull up a game like Elden Ring or Demon Souls, and half of the time they'll just show a picture of the sword. They don't actually render the sword in your menu. And so you can scroll. They seem to actually be rendering all of these things in 3D for menu systems and with holograms and stuff that probably they shouldn't be doing. And I think that's half of the reason. So my argument would be not that the performance is good, because it should be better. It's just I can clearly see what's causing the issues. The debate is, should they have done those things? Not, it doesn't make sense why the performance is bad at times. So I will say this, though. I did look at a hardware unboxed, tested Borderlands 4 today. I've looked at Tech Power Up. It definitely does seem to run worse on PC. I mean, from what I can tell, the PS5 Pro is almost performing like a 5070 Ti or something. We'll see. I haven't seen an NX Gamer or Digital Foundry analysis of like maybe it's running low settings. I don't know, right? But it seems to me like it seems to perform several tiers of graphics above where I would usually think it's around a 7800 XT or 4070 Super. So even then, though, I think the PS5 could be a much smoother. The PS5 Pro, it doesn't even have a PS5 Pro Enhanced badge. I don't know if that's a mistake. There's a lot of weird things and wonky things about this game's performance. And so I gave my little bit of a defense, but I have to say it does seem to run subpar to what you would expect. What do you think is going on here?
Well, I think like there's a bunch of things that are going on here. It used to be that when we stylized games visually, right? Like Borderlands is a stylized visual game. When you stylize them, you would gain performance back rather than lose it, because you would literally be changing the renderer often. You'd be adjusting the renderer, you'd make it whatever, draw less colors or whatever. You would be playing around in that space before it hits the GPU so that it would run faster, more optimal. But now what's happening with shader workflows, Unreal Engine, and whatnot is I guarantee my guess. I can't guarantee it. My guess with Borderlands is that they're using a post process to create that stylized effect. So what that means is that they have extra blueprints in the materials for each of the materials that call out to a post process profile, right? And then the post process draws this after rendering everything hyper realistically as an additional layer. So instead of being more performant, it's oftentimes less performant to have stylized games now compared to before, because before we were in the renderer, adjusting the renderer in custom engines and doing all of this to get things to look the way we want, but also save performance. But now oftentimes it's an after the fact post process. And that means it's rendering everything with its PBR materials. It's some of these things now, when you go stylized in a game, you might have to break up how you do things. Like if you're doing a realistic game, you might use like an ORM map, which is your ambient occlusion, your metalness, and your ORM. Basically, you break all of that into your texture. So it's one texture that contains 3 different maps using different color channels. But when you stylize, you might actually have to break it out from that. So instead of getting the texture savings, right, you end up having to pull out each separate map and then do something specific to it. And then you can't collapse them all the same way that you do. You might be in that situation. You're adding this after the fact. Some games like Marvel Rivals did a really good job optimizing for Unreal, but that's because you never shift time of day. You're logged in a setting, the lighting's fixed, and they use unlit materials. So the stylization's placed on the characters, the lighting is all baked in the scene, and then it's unlit. The materials don't react to light the way that they do in a game to Borderlands.
With
So
the
we have all
times
of
constantly changing in a giant open world. Yeah.
You're in a big open world, time's changing. You have a lot of like alpha blending is expensive. When you have anything transparent, or if you have any like overlay effects, that kind of, it almost goes up exponentially in terms of performance cost with resolution. So we end up in weird situations when you have a lot of semi-transparent or things in front of other things, so that the cost from everything I've seen tends to be pretty heavy with stuff like that in games. So when you have, there's some of the stuff that I want to get into talking to you with some of the engine stuff. I knew you were going to ask me a question about this. That's why I threw my Unreal shirt, because I might as well straight into the fire with what's happening here. I will say, like, as someone who's worked in a lot of game engines, and I actually, like, yesterday I was at a party with friends that all worked at different game studios who have
Mhm.
worked at different engines. They worked in Snowdrop and whatever. They've, like, all of them have Frostbite, Snowdrop, things like that. They've
The
touched
Snowdrop, a Ubisoft one.
Snowdrop's Ubisoft,
Okay.
Frostbite's EA,
Yep.
for Dice, and they've all worked in
Like
Unity.
Snowdrop's Assassin's Creed. No, am I remembering that? Was
Yeah,
that
yeah. Snowdrop. It's Raving Rabbids, Assassin's Creed. It's Ubisoft's engine. So when
just
you
to give
just
people an idea of what that engine looks like if they played that game? But continue.
yeah, yeah. So you have these people, and what I think a lot of people don't know about game development is Unreal Engine is interesting because every other engine that I've worked in at some point in time, you're in some setting where you're getting like 5 to 10 FPS during like a 4 month period where it just everything is getting put in, but it hasn't been optimized or pulled together. And then you're trudging through game development for a while. And maybe there's some projects where it doesn't end up like that. I typically that like I saw that left, right, and center. And when you're talking like dev kits and whatnot, I remember I was working in a studio at one point where it was PS3 and Xbox 360 dev kits that took like 40 minutes to load, crashed all the time, and ran at 5 frames per second with the games that they were developing at that point in time. So, like, game developers have had to torture themselves through lots of settings in the past. And Unreal is kind of deceptive in a way because it never runs that bad, right? You're oftentimes, when you're building things in Unreal, it'll either crash entirely if you exceed your asset resources, or you can change your scalability settings, you can lower all of that. But you can be in developing in UE5 and you're basically almost always over 20, 30 FPS, right? But then what happens is when you're in the optimization pass at the end of game development, there's almost nothing left to get back. It's so hard to get any performance back from what
Mm.
I've seen. And maybe some other people are capable of doing that. And it also depends on your game idea, what kind of things you have in your game, whether you can harden assets and you know um, batch things together and do a lot of optimizations at the end. Sometimes your game's a little too dynamic to do some of the optimizations that everyone does. If your game's less dynamic, if it's very static, then you can do lot more optimizations, I would say. But there's things you can do no matter what. But it does feel, when you're working in UE5 particularly, it's hard to get it consistently over the 60 line when you start pulling back assets. But it never runs as poorly as some of the other engines experiences that I've had,
So it's
where
very easy to develop. It never gets completely bogged down. But then once it's time to finish the game, it's just like, that's it. That's
well,
where the assets are.
I think that's part of what the initial draw was, why so many devs and studios switched to UE5 when they first
Hmm.
started, when UE5 was first coming out, before any games started shipping, is that they released the tool, studios played with it, and the initial impressions are better than the
Very
initial
good.
impressions in a lot of engines. So when
Well, I mean,
you're
think of those demos that like ran on the PS5 with the Matrix, or I had that UE demo on my PC that was like the one where you throw stuff at a giant like stone golem, and it looked really cool, and it looked the graphics were incredible. But if you think about it, it wasn't really a game yet.
No, it wasn't a game. And like the thing is, like, I would say this, and this is something that was echoed by all of the devs that I was talking to yesterday, because I asked them kind of some questions in advance, was because these are people who programmed for 10, 15 years in various engines. And they were saying that when it comes to no, when it comes to programming and releasing for UE, if it's a game that, like, your best chance for performance is if it's one of their profile games. So if it's like a first person shooter or a third person shooter, your chance at getting your performance where you want is higher than if you have to develop way more systems, because the based engine cost is very high, I would say, for what's there. So the second you start adding more features or more ways to traverse, more things like that are different than other games, then the cost goes up like crazy. And I feel like it's the hardest engine to tell when I've worked in it, where you're bound. I feel like the profiling in other engines was just clearer. Oh, I'm GPU bound here, I'm CPU bound here. It feels like when you're playing around in Unreal and you're trying to profile it, you'll see it looks like it's GPU bound, and then you do a bunch of things to relieve GPU resources, and then your frame rate barely goes up at all. And then same with and then this is me seeing other people interact with this. So I personally am not a programmer, I'm an art director, but I have to talk to people that are doing these things all the time, and I have for years. But I do feel like Unreal has some. It's just the base cost is very, very high of the engine, and there's going to be some devs that either you cut one of the core features like Nanite and Lumen, and then you restrict your game. Like you restrict your game in that way, but you might be able to get more performance back by doing one of those things, or you try to optimize around them, which might be possible, or you might not be able to get it to where you want. And there's lots of weird things, like even stupid things. Like I was working in, I was probably a moron for doing this, but I was playing around on my laptop with even just my pixel art Radiant Starlets, 3D 2D hybrid game with real time lighting, and like it uses. I was playing around with ray traced like software ray traced global illumination and stuff with it. But even in that, so I like to work on my laptop at night, which is like got a 3070 in it. And
Me too, by the way, which is funny. I don't want to be in my office at night. That's what it is.
My wife wants to watch something with me or whatnot, and I just want to work a bit while we watch something together. So we'll put on something and I'll work on the laptop, which is like a way more restrained situation. And then I'm like, oh, I'm getting such terrible performance. I can't do any captures of my game on it. So I went and I was just optimizing things. So I just went into my assets, and then I was I was turning so I was going to say, but my build when I played it on my desktop was running at like 200 and some odd frames per second. When I played it on
the
my
4090, right?
4090 950X 3D. When I played on that, I was running at like 200 plus FPS, no problem. And then, but what happened was I went and I just grabbed all my assets because I'm like, there's not that many assets in this. So I set them to call at, like I just set the distance for them to call out of existence. And I put it on my laptop. My performance was way better in my laptop because it was way less GPU bound, right? But then I went to record footage on my desktop, and it was like stuck at 70 FPS instead of the 200 it was getting because I had made it so CPU bound just by all of the extra calls looking to turn off assets. And there's things I could do to optimize that. I could batch it all, or I can turn off individual work groups and whatnot. But I was just like fumbling around trying to get some fast footage. It wasn't like I was doing real game optimizations. But it was interesting how I took something that was GPU bound on my laptop, wasn't really GPU bound on my desktop, but I removed some of the GPU bottleneck on my laptop so that I could get better footage on my laptop, but it was immediately CPU bound on my other desktop, right? So you can have weird situations like that where you go from one to the other just by trying to mitigate something off of GPU or onto CPU. And devs face this when they are trying to put something into compute, right? Like sometimes they're like, oh well, this is too heavy on the CPU, let's put it in compute, but then it hammers your GPU time too much, right? And you're trying to figure out, do we put this more on GPU or CPU? What part of there's usually different ways to do systems where it can be using different resources, and then you got to be careful how you balance all of that to get performance where you want.
Well, first of all, let me just say that it is, and I thought of this while you were talking, but I didn't want to interrupt you. It is the Anvil engine they use for Assassin's Creed. It is a snowdrop for the Division 2. I have to say that to save us from the comments.
Yes, sorry.
I made the mistake too. But my point is, like, with actually responding to what you said, though, not just correcting myself. So it seems like for Borderlands 4, for the most part, you just think that, well, and am I wrong? Does this play into kind of what I thought I noticed? Like there's an immense amount of detail, foliage, grass, actual grass, not textures, like particle effects, all this stuff. And then actually I'll add this too. On top of that, they do cell shading. A lot of people, I've seen all these comments, they go, oh, it's cell shaded, so this should be easy to run. No. And that is not how it's worked since Borderlands 1. They render it like a realistic game, and then they have a filter that shell shades over the whole thing.
Yeah, you do a depth pass, and you'll isolate assets, and you do it in your pixel shader essentially.
But so it lowers performance to get this art style. And for those who don't know, you could turn off cell shading in Borderlands 2, and I thought it actually looked better and gain like 30% performance. So I wonder if in the INI files people have started doing that with Borderlands 4 yet. I haven't seen any benchmarks, but by the time this comes out, they might find you do that, just boom, 30% performance boost on PC, and I think at least, it looks better. But all the stuff you're saying about Unreal Engine 5, if they're doing a whole other pass just to get to the cell shading, and they have excessive physics and all these other little things going on,
yeah,
this kind of plays into what you're saying, right? It's hard to get back performance. They built this immersive world, and then they cell shaded it in an engine that isn't known to be really efficient unless you do exactly what they expect you to do with the engine. You know what I mean? Is that a good way to put it too?
Yeah, well, like typically out of like I would say my experience, conferences, various things, and I'm not a dev myself, so take it with, a grain of salt or whatnot. But
You're not this type of developer.
yeah, I'm not this type. I'm like more art, visuals, and whatnot. But I talk more about these things because I'm more inquisitive. So I just ask a lot of questions to people that know all of these things. And sometimes too, those devs are too deep in the weeds on their particular issue to see the whole picture. So I often find that those devs find me insightful because I'm a little bit back and I can kind of piece together everyone's picture. Whereas sometimes people are just too deep into features. But what I was going to say is, like, a lot of these things before would have been done by changing the renderer. But you have so much potential for damage by letting any dev have access to a renderer, like the renderer on Unreal Engine or whatnot. There's chance to gain.
What do you mean by changing the render? I actually don't even know what that means.
You can literally like rewrite, like take Unreal off of its engine
standard
path,
one, or
its standard one, and then you can start modifying how the engine actually draws things on the screen.
So if they really wanted to do one for the Borderlands style, that they probably could.
They
just probably didn't.
But like literally, in my experience, you trust maybe 1 out of every 100 to 200 developers to touch a renderer, because the potential for great things is there, but the potential to ruin everything is equally there. And then you've created a massive bottleneck because you probably have one person or two people capable of messing with it, right, to try to fix it. So bug testing it is a little bit more difficult. So you kind of trust someone like Unreal. The other thing too is that if you go off the engine pathway, so let's say you start changing the renderer in your game engine, now you've also messed up your update pathway from Unreal. So what happens then is, instead of just getting the updates from your engine, right, let's say it's Unity or Unreal or whatever, you now, because you have a custom renderer, have to basically just keep patching in your changes every time a new engine comes and check to see if anything's broken. So it dramatically slows down your progress and being able to continue moving on. It creates more danger in even just pulling an update from Unreal if you choose to do something like, customize your render or whatnot. It's one of these things. Like, the worst thing to do with, let's say that they decided, instead of going the post-processing route with Borderlands, and I don't know what they did, and right. I'm sure that there's a ton of people.
Someone will
really
figure it out.
Yeah. Like, maybe they're doing something completely different, and I'm dead wrong. But like, that's just my speculation on it. But let's say that they did. Imagine that they did it all through the renderer, and then suddenly the next month Unreal drops a big patch that massively improves performance,
right?
And then they pull it, but everything's broken visually, and then they have to completely rebuild the way that because the chances are too that if they have an update to Unreal that dramatically improves performance, which
has happened a lot recently.
It's going to change the renderer that they've modified.
Yeah.
Right. So you end up in this weird situation where it's trying to do certain passes or draw to the screen in certain order, or it's doing very particular. It has a very particular pipeline for how it's assembling the scene, and then you've made modifications to that to stylize the game in your way. But then the second you pull the update, they've changed how they do that, so everything you did to stylize your game is broken, right? So it does kind of it makes you want to play more with using post processes or materials or things like that to try to get your game to look the way you want, rather than because the PBR pipeline, when it was like PS3 and Xbox 360 gen, it was hard, right? That was a hard gen to try to make things look realistic, but it became so standardized that the engines are built for it. So when you fight it now, that's what's hard. A little bit anyways.
And so you haven't played it though, have you?
I haven't touched Borderlands particularly, no.
So this is something that, have you played any of them before?
I played Borderlands 1, 2, and 3 a bit. I think I tried Tina's Wonderland as well.
Yeah, I fell off that one a little bit. Didn't keep me as interested. But so it doesn't work like the other ones where it loads maps and then you do it. It is true open world. And I just looked it up. It is, I think, 30% bigger than the entire map of Skyrim. That gets interesting. My friend was going to travel back to like the home base node to like upgrade some guns or sell some stuff. well, I was already at the side mission area, still at the side mission area. And I'm like, well, won't this make us both teleport there? And he goes, no. And then he teleports and I'm there. And I'm like, wait, I'm like 10 kilometers away from you right now.
Yeah.
All the enemies are here and they're also next to you. I think that also might be why the performance is bad, is it seems to be almost running. And I believe the game is split into 4 main maps, to be fair, but it's almost like it's simulating an entire open world game at once, and you could have multiple people in multiple places while enemies are doing stuff.
Does it have objects that have world physics that is shared between multiple people?
I think so.
What you like, because
from what I can tell, yeah, everything seems to be in the same spot between us.
That's hard. So I mean, like, to some extent, that's some technical mastery to pull off. But if you have, like, it's one, like if a tree falls in the woods, but if you literally cut down a tree in the woods in a game, if you have to synchronize that across the people playing online together, that's way harder than if it's just doing different things on both people's computers. And it's not
Yep.
it's not
a classic example. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this, but like, there's a lot of games where a body, you shoot someone, the body falls, and the body is literally in the same spot everywhere. And then there's games like, at least I don't know if Battlefield 6, but every Battlefield I played up until now, where I will blow up a tank, and one of my friends will go, that looked silly, but none of us saw it. Only the physics in my game freaked out and how the tank looked when it blew up. That means it's not always the same. As far as I can tell, a lot of the stuff is the same in Borderlands. I don't want to make a claim that it all is. From what I can tell, I throw a gun, it landed exactly where I threw it. Because you would have to do that because you can give your friends guns. You can't throw it and have it land somewhere where you're not. So I believe we have a situation here where not only do we have all these physics, not only do we have all these special effects, not only is there a cell shading pass that other games don't have to do to make it look like a comic book, but we also have basically an entire simulation being run of an area where people can be tens of kilometers away from each other, and there's enemies at the same time, AI being run in different areas at the same time, and objects landing and being remembered where they were at the same time. Like, and to give you an example too, my friend went through part of the map. I joined him an hour after he started playing, and I went through it. Everything he had dropped was where it was on the other side of the map still. So again, I'm not saying that these were good choices. I am saying I think I can see why the performance is bad. Is because it's actually doing way more than people realize.
It's a bigger deal if they're physics based, for sure. So if you drop it and then get kicked around and stuff, that's even more of a nightmare. But I think we have to keep in mind too, with online games, that synchronicity is a lie. So devs lie to make it look like it's happening in two places at the same time as much as they can. But there's if we are on an internet, and there's latency, right? So that latency is going to make it almost like, it is technically, like, I guess it's theoretically possible, but no game is really truly happening at the same time, the same way on both computers. We just have done a lot of things to hide the fact that it's not. So it seems like it is, right? And the best games that do this well do a great job of covering up the fact that it's not happening exactly the same in the same way on two different computers at the same time, right? And when you're playing with your friends. But I mean, and we've made huge improvements on this kind of stuff compared to like 10, 15 years ago. This was like almost impossible back then, but it is still one of these things where, the second I hear someone, they have an idea, and it's like the second you're like trying to being able to cut down every tree in a game and have the logs roll and function identically in all these different people playing the game and having,
the second it goes from single player to even 4 people doing that, massive performance hits.
Yeah. So, it's always complicated. Like, when people are like, is this game optimized? I'm like, what's in it? Right? Like,
exactly.
How is it doing it? Is the lighting baked? Is it a real-time lighting? How many physics-based objects are there? Like, what's happening? Is it online multiplayer? Is it not? Like, you just kind of look at the profile of the game, and then I personally just have different expectations based on how technically challenging I think an aspect of it is. The other thing with you're saying that there's so much stuff. I do find that if you're using Nanite and Unreal, you basically a sunk cost, and you might as well fill the world with stuff, because it doesn't tank performance that much. You've already took the performance cost by enabling the feature, right? So you can disable the feature and have more performance to play with, but then you have to be very, very cautious about how much stuff you put in the world. Or you turn on the feature and you can be much, much less cautious about how much it is, but you've sunk a ton of cost into using this feature. that's how it feels for me. And I know that they've made updates in some of the most recent versions of Unreal that reduce how much performance. They've much more sufficiently multi-threaded this aspect of it, whereas prior it's
Mhm.
very single thread bound.
Yeah, I had a couple developers reach out to me about that it made a huge difference. There was a 5.6 update or something.
Yeah, 5.6, it went way more multi-threaded on that particular on nanite and whatnot. So then it ended up just running better.
But yeah, so to summarize, I mean, I think again, look, we don't know. I haven't even seen like a digital foundry comparison. If I'm just wrong that actually the PS5 Pro is performing like a 4060, not a 50. I don't know, but like from what I can tell from the sharpness, it does seem like the PC version's running worse. But also, this is, I believe, a much more complicated to run game than people realize. The art style is misleading, and I think I the argument is, did they make the right decisions to get to the performance you would expect out of a given graphics card? It's not they just hit the I want bad performance because I'm stupid button. I
It's
don't
a
think that's
Gearbox,
what
right?
happened. Yeah.
Gearbox, yeah. I like. I've been and talked with a lot of Gearbox people. They have a lot of developers that really know their stuff and care deeply about these kind of things. So
But do you think they can fix it easily, or do you think this is just where the performance is going to be?
well, I'm sure they can get some of it back, right? I don't know what percentage it is, right? Like,
Right.
and it's. I think another thing that it's a bit harder for gamers to think about when like, and maybe this is just my experience. I don't know if it's the same in every studio, but the second you have people playing with live save files,
Mm.
it's just a different world, because when you're in the development environment, they typically, like almost most games that I've seen and a lot of game developers I talk to, end up where the vast majority of the development, they make changes and it deletes your save and you're starting fresh, because you make points so you can load in and check certain areas, and you have whatever hotkeys or commands that let you warp around, equip certain things, do whatnot, right? Like you build profiles that you can take advantage of to do the things you need to do. But we like destroy save progress left, right, and center from most, like a lot of game studios will destroy that kind of stuff. So the second you put something live and everyone is saving, they're expecting to be able to load exactly, have everything the way that it was as they're doing it. Some things are a little bit more off the table, or handle with care compared to when they're in development. And so you might not be able to get as much performance back for things like that. It's messier than you'd think, right? Like the second people are playing live, you need the feedback, which is funny because like you need to put it out there to see, because people who are in it sometimes have the hardest time seeing whether or not it's good enough or not. But I don't know. It's muddy. The other thing with like console versus PC is there's just so many more guarantees with console that
Hmm.
if it's optimized well, like we saw it a bit with Dragon's Dogma 2. I know NXG did a good coverage of that as well.
Hmm.
That
Yeah, I mean, he found in that game and in a few games, from what I could tell, that the PS5 and I believe probably to a degree Xbox Series X at a minimum seems to have their Zen 2 processors. Like in areas on PC where if you had a weaker processor, you'll get frame dips. The PS5 and Xbox Series X seem to perform like Zen 3 or better because of the optimizations you get as a console and a fixed form of hardware, which is interesting because always it's like, oh, you get better performance if it's a console versus a PC, but it's always like, oh, you get better. No one quantifies it. This quantified, it could be like 30% or something.
well, like where PC is the most vulnerable is essentially the variance, right? And you and I have talked about this several times before. PC's individual components are all way better, but because of like if you properly use the I/O block, right, in PS5, which for those who don't know, it has a special, basically an ASIC on the die that compresses, decompresses assets in one pass, where to do the same thing on PC is 5 to 6 copies, right? So essentially you're moving way more data on PC to be equivalent to just passing something to the proper IO block on that. And the other thing is that compression and decompression is often one of the threaded operations on a PC, because they're sending it to a thread on the CPU to decompress and then compress assets, or with direct storage and whatnot. Oftentimes they're moving certain aspects of this to the GPU instead of the CPU. So But if you do it on console, there's hardware there. And then with PS5, you also have Tempest Engine that you can use to accelerate some things and you can pass all your audio to. So if you have a PS5 and you send everything to the perfect channels, it will perform much better than a PC with similar specs. With PC, what you have is each individual component's a lot stronger. You'll have, a faster, whatever. You can have a Gen
Yeah,
5
you'll have a
SSD
6 gigahertz 16 core instead of really of 6.5 core is what you get access to on console, maybe 7 core Zen 2. But then you have this, like you're saying, IO controller that can be the equivalent of 20 cores of Zen 2 to stream data.
just doing data streaming,
That's
compression,
probably where these drops
decompression.
happen on PC, but they don't happen on console. And like
Well,
Game
and it's also maybe why we saw direct storage kind of fall by the wayside. And like, is that devs didn't like, um, they didn't like the idea of having to explain sudden GPU. Because I remember I texted you because I was in a talk for a direct storage at GDC when I was there. And there was a slide that showed how much GPU resources it could snatch in a split second. So if you're doing something like, let's say you're you're in some firefight that's important and you blow something up and you need to dodge something with really, really low latency. And it just so happens at that point in time, it's going to try to load things to direct storage and tank your frame rate. Those are kind of things that are a bit scarier to give to, to move to GPU resources rather than CPU resources, because suddenly you're tanking someone's frame rate when they need it the most, right? Like by as much as I think it was like 20 to 30% of your GPU it could take to
Yep.
have your GPU block doing the compression, decompression.
Yeah, that's something
and
I always try to explain to people. And they're
transfer.
like, well, direct storage will be just as good as what the PS5 and to a lesser extent the Xbox Series consoles can do. And it's like, maybe, but you understand that means then take 3080 and now it's at 3070 performance, right? When it's
But it's
doing it.
randomly at 3070 performance is one of the
Right.
things.
And it's not even consistent. So
It's
it's
not
like,
consistent because most of the times it's not doing it. And then occasionally you'll just be hit by the needs to do a huge, read write cycle. And then all of a sudden your frame rate drops for that section, right? But gamers won't see that as like it'll be harder to see where that's happening, right? So yeah, anyways, I think that's kind of one of the things when you have console hardware, it its lows, like its average will be lower than a lot of
yes,
hardware, but it's
the peak
probably,
performance is much lower.
if an engine is like really well tuned for it though, it's not going to get hit as heavy
The
in
floor
the
is higher.
yeah the floor is higher, but it has, it's a good way to put it. So that's kind of the advantage, because we're at the situation now where PC hardware is so disparate and powerful. So you have like massive GPU, big CPU, huge RAM pool, big SSD storage, but they're all away
Or
from each
no
other.
RAM pool.
They're all away from each other, right? And then they're just passing data back and forth, and they're trying to stay synchronized. When you have a console, it's one unit that's less of all of those things in one place, and then a cohesive unit of RAM. And it just, the way that it manages assets can be much more maximized, I would say.
Well, Brian, one thing I have to interrupt the conversation for is how people can maximize their savings if they go to Micro Center. This piece of content is brought to you by Micro Center. Right now, you can shop Micro Center's clearance and overstock event, and they also have the ability to get a free 128 gigabyte USB at their new Phoenix location if you sign up for it. Also, there's a link below to Micro Center News so you don't miss all the new upcoming stuff they have for you. And also, they have a entire build planner. I believe you can just spec out your build, send it to them, they build it, you show up in an hour, and it's done. So truly, especially when it comes to the CPU and motherboards, I think that there has never been a better time to build a PC right now. The deals are absolutely insane. So support Moore's Law is dead by checking out Micro Center through the links below today. All right, let's continue this. Like, you're already talking about all this optimization. We're starting to get into console versus PC. So I think I just want to skip right ahead to this question here from Bud Light AI 999. As a game developer, which is more interesting to you, the PS handheld or the PS6 home console? And this is my way of just launching into the conversation of like, I had an initial leak and I was like, this is old info though. Then I got the up-to-date info and broke it into 2 videos about the handheld and also about the cost to make the consoles and what's possible for the amount of RAM they might have first as a video. And then is the PS6 focused one. Yeah, I told you all the information about the home console version or PS6 desktop, if you will. But then I also went into like, why you shouldn't maybe freak out that it's only double to tripling whatever raster when they're going to over 10x ray tracing in specific scenarios, which I will say some people are like, what do you mean 6 to 12x ray tracing? I mean, light ray tracing, it's probably 6 times faster. Brutal path tracing, 12 times faster than PS5. That's really how it works now too, where you can find situations where RDNA 4 is like 4 times faster than RDNA 3 in ray tracing if it's path tracing at 30 frames a second. But anyways, I digress. What do you think about these products? What are you more excited for? And you must just have a lot of thoughts in general about what next gen is going to look like.
Yeah. I mean, everyone's curious. I do think that one of the things that's hard is the land of diminishing returns.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like there's that image that you can find online that's like what, like a 30 polygons to, 300 to 13 to 16,000, and then it goes to like millions, and there's very little difference between 16,000 and millions when it comes to polygons, right? The big push that we saw with PS4 was lighting, right? So like PS3 and whatnot, we went to PS4. We started getting a lot of like really nice baked solutions for lighting. Started getting bounce lighting
and having enough RAM for true open world, I would say.
Yeah, well, I mean visually, like primarily just on the visual front. When you're talking about a PS handheld and a console, you're talking about a floor and a ceiling, right? So you have now a range to work in. I do think that like game developers in particular have a certain love for handhelds. It might be the nature of their jobs being so obsessive and having to find nooks of time to play games, or being sent to conferences and just wanting to pull something out and play it for a bit,
or being tired of being in their office because their gaming studio is actually also their work studio.
Well, I know I know game developers that have outright said to me they know it's better on PC, but they prefer to play on console because they work on the PC all day. So they're just
that's
on
happening
PC.
to me a little bit. It's like where I might get a Strix Halo mini PC just so I can play my PC games at decent settings on my big screen, just because I don't want to be in the same office all day. But continue.
Yeah, so you end up with these kind of situations. Another thing, like, it's getting a little messy, I guess. Like the talk of engines and games and hardware, right? Now, will we notice? Let's say it's 2.5 times faster in raster, like better in raster.
So that's like 90/70 raster. It's not bad,
No, it's a good amount of raster. Is that what's going to make? I feel like at this point you would need to be like 6 to 10 times better on raster to.
You need to be like 60/90 raster to notice the difference for a casual gamer, especially.
Yeah, you need a huge difference to. I mean, yeah, you could
unless you're going to like 300 frames per second. Which you're not. They're going to be on a TV that's limited. A lot of people would be limited to 60, actually.
And we're kind of also in the post-resolution era, I would say, whether gamers or people like.
Get ready. There's going to be some all caps people saying, I only play native, but continue.
They can play native. There's nothing wrong with that. But, you're getting these comparisons now where, like, let's say you use Street Fighter 6, right? That runs with DLSS on Switch 2. And technically, it's doing everything worse than the Xbox One S version, but it almost comes together looking better because it's using DLSS upscaling, so it looks sharper and higher resolution than it's actually technically running at lower resolution with some lower settings, but it doesn't appear that way. So resolution is getting to be like a finicky thing, and when we're talking about like a handheld versus a console, this gets to be pretty important, right? Because let's say we have whatever the PS handheld and this. I guarantee the biggest difference, one of the biggest differences with PS6 is going to be that any game that's developed with PS6, either handheld or console in mind, is going to have PSR or PSSR or
FSR4 or 5
FSR
or whatever.
or 6 or whatnot. And also I said one of the last times, I think 2 times ago, that it felt like at that point in time there was this huge chasm between DLSS and FSR and XESS and these things, right? Like DLSS was so far ahead, but I said at the time, we're coming on the land of diminishing returns, right? Where at some point one of these is going to be so good and then everything else will just gradually catch up, and then the perceivable difference between them will be so small in terms of the upscaling. Those are AI questions coming. What else we can do in that space is a different conversation entirely. There's more space.
Well, let's stick with the raw performance thing for now.
But I'm just saying that like every game, every engine, by the time PS6 ships, has this as a feature. And then what the biggest difference is between a console and the handheld is going to be resolution targets. Maybe some assets, some shadow resolutions, things like that. But the vast majority of the differences are probably going to be the resolution targets. And I know that some gamers don't like the fact that devs like to think this way, but
Mm.
I think most devs personally don't like that I've talked to and interacted with feel worse about you changing settings in ways that hurt how they intended the game to look visually than they do about image quality. And maybe that's the wrong move, right? I don't know. Like, I know that some gamers really don't like that, and maybe gamers just have to really make that known, right? But I like personally, if I made a game with visuals that looked a certain way and they looked really good that way, and then someone cuts it down to like, flat shading with no shadows and that, I can't watch them play that. I feel like,
Well, and
part
so
of me feels disgusting.
that's the problem too with the Series S. I've gone and I like that you brought up Street Fighter 6 because I hadn't seen this, but while you were talking, I actually pulled it up to look quick. I'm looking at a still that Gerard can put on screen here. And yeah, you have Series S and Switch 2. I agree, the Switch 2 version looks better than the Series S, despite it being arguably a little weaker in the GPU department. Not arguably, it should be a little weaker.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things going on. Like a big thing, tons of people have like asked me is like, how can this handheld not hold back the main console? And the main two pillars of my argument are number one, FSR4, which when you actually break down the handheld's performance, when I finally put in all the work for that final leak, I realized like, well, it has ray tracing closer to the PS5 Pro than the PS5. It has raster that's over half as good as the PS5. Add FSR4, it actually is probably going to give you better image quality than the base PS5.
Yeah.
Period. With and better ray tracing. It actually might look quite a bit better, which is crazy. But I guess that's just where we are now with the software and the more modern architectures of graphics cards. But on top of that, when you then go, okay, but still, you're talking about something that is 16, I think it is, compute units instead of 52. This is a bigger gulf in compute unit difference, I believe. Yes, it's actually similar, but maybe because of the clock speed difference, it's probably even a bigger difference than Series S to Series X. My answer as to why that's probably, again, we'll have to see benchmarks, but why I suspect it might not be as big of an issue is the problem with the Series S was twofold. It was a Gen 2 early, and it didn't have enough RAM. If the handheld and the main console have a similar RAM buffer, that was the main thing that caused the Series S issues. Me and you have talked about that episode after episode.
Yeah, I think too, the problem with the Series S is that it was never going to be the target. So what happens, just because of Sony's market share is an important thing in terms of shaping the way that games are built and expectations. And so PS5 was going to set the low point, right? It was going to set the baseline for what games are. The problem is that the Series S comes as something to target below the baseline that people are really focused on. So you're just not going to get the level of care and optimizations from the vast majority of studios to take advantage of something like that. So oddly enough, Microsoft probably wasn't in a position to release the Series S.
And have it get the backing that like even a Switch would get, because the Switch sells 150 million copies.
Well, that's the thing is like,
or unit.
You can say that, but they ported, like you can say the Series S is too weak, but people port to the base Switch with tons of effort, and it has 256 shaders and like what? Like there's essentially no hardware
3 gigabytes
there in comparison.
or 3.2 gigabytes, whatever it is of RAM. I don't know.
Yeah, like it's very very meager, the hardware in the Switch, but people focus on it because of market share. And Microsoft wasn't in the position to have a low end and high end console, unfortunately. I don't mean anything ill by it, but they didn't have the mind share and the market share to be able to pull a move like that.
Not unless they priced it so aggressively it took a ton of market share. Well, they really didn't.
They would have to have the market share for it. The other problem too is and this is a problem for Sony and other things too, is that, and I'm not against it, but the cross PC release means that console hardware is less focused on, and PC gamers might delight in that, and that could be fine. But it does mean that we're not going to get as many games that really push things out the way that they used to, because PC is too broad to do it with, right? To some extent, there's too much 3060s and 2060s out there. There's too many, GPU just variations between Radeon and that. People have storage bottlenecks. People also just like have a faulty SSD that's messing things up, or
I have
they've
that.
maxed out all of their SSDs and they're wondering why they're operating slowly. There's so many variables in a PC space that are hard to target the way that consoles go. And we have interesting situations like, and this it comes kind of back to the Unreal talk, but we just had like the Konami resurgence, right? We had Metal Gear Solid 3 is re-released in Unreal 5, right? Um,
It
and
also has performance issues, pretty bad ones apparently.
and it came out a month after Death Stranding 2.
Mm-hmm.
And Death Stranding 2 is the exact opposite.
Yeah,
Like
it's incredibly well
you
optimized.
pop Death Stranding 2 in a PS5, like a base PS5 on your TV, and I don't think I've ever seen anything look this good. Like
Yeah, it's incredible. It's the best looking game I've ever played in my life.
unbelievable. Like the audio quality too. Like
Mm.
how if you have a really nice surround setup and you hear that, I had to put it on for. I've only played like the first hour of it, and I had to turn it off because I know my wife will want to play it with me. But like the beginning of the experience, I was like, regardless what you think of Kojima or storytelling or whatnot, in terms of like an engine using what that hardware is capable of, it's unbelievable. But then you go to Delta, Metal Gear Delta, which is funny because it's a remake of the same vision that was pushing the PS2 to its absolute maximum way back in the day. And then now you're getting all these comparisons too, because Metal Gear Solid 3, the remake Delta, almost looks like not that much better than Metal Gear Solid 5 on
I don't think it does.
on PS4. So you have this, you have one in Unreal 5 using like PS2 essentially level of like peak PS2 game building and all of that, and then you've remade it in an engine, and then you have uh, you have Death Stranding 2 come out using Decima, one of the most technically capable engines that exists, with a team that cares about getting everything about it. And I honestly think, outside of, I honestly feel like Death Stranding and Death Stranding 2, from a visual perspective, do more to utilize Decima than even Horizon or Horizon Forbidden
Again,
West.
I think it's the best looking game. Yeah.
Yeah, so like that's my personal opinion. That's how I feel when you play something like that. But when you have an engine and a game like using all of it on hardware, and it's punching above its weight in resolution and frame rate, it's so consistent. And then you play something like Unreal, where they're rebuilding all of these assets in Metal Gear Delta, and you can see kind of one of these things. It's a difference in teams, right? It's not the same team, the same intensity of focus in the team. They're making concessions because they're doing engine. They might be running two sets of, like oftentimes with Blue Point set the standard for running two sets of code essentially on top of each other. You basically are running the PS2 code and then you're running the additional layer. I don't know if it's doing that or not, but that does have performance overhead cost to be essentially running two games at the same time. I know Ninja Gaiden did the same thing. The re-release Ninja Gaiden 2 that just came out, it's running both versions of the game simultaneously, and then it's basically just hijacked the renderer and it's re-rendering everything in Unreal after it processes the base game. But you end up with these interesting situations and points of comparison when you have like an engine built for a game that's using hardware to its utmost versus when you have a widespread engine that's used to very easily pull in assets and features, build worlds quickly, right? But not necessarily as tailor focused to it. And it's also how you get games like Metroid Prime Remastered on Switch, which punches way above what 256 shaders should be capable of doing, right? When you have scenarios where games aren't made like that. And I'm a little worried about losing this because like it seems like Sony's current motto is a year, it'll come to PC in a year, right? Like maybe two. And the part of me that wants everyone to have access to these kind of games has no issue with that. I think it's a wonderful thing. The part of me that as an art form wants to see games do the most they're ever capable of doing, just wants to see every bit of hardware get everything that can come out of that hardware. I love when games scrape the corners of what you think a piece of kit can do. There's something really special about that. And I just think that's where art direction always reaches its peak in video games, is somewhere in that space. So the artist in me is most excited by that. So I'm a little worried that we're going to lose that. the more broad the focus, right, the harder stuff like that is. You talk about PS handheld, PS6 console, then my kind of question lies in that we're setting a new floor and a ceiling for what theoretically makes games possible. We're expecting to port these games to PC in a year, which means that we're building them a bit differently than we used to build them, right? One of the reasons we're not seeing PS5 games come out that push hardware the way that we saw games in the past is because they are now building them and expecting to pass them into PC at that point in time. So maybe they don't want to go as heavy on ASIC compute for a particular feature in case someone on PC doesn't have access to that hardware. So then they're causing development problems for themselves further down the line by targeting all of the features. Or let's say you do some crazy audio processing in Tempest and then you port it to PC and you just can't do what you were doing with audio or whatever the acceleration that used to. It will stop us from pushing that kind of stuff. The thing that I guess I'm the
Well,
most
this is where I actually want to jump in and like make my argument for why. And again, we'll have to see. It could be I'm only making an argument for what might be going on here, which I think pretty clearly the PS6 desktop will aim to do 60. Then there'll probably still be 30 FPS per quality
games.
modes, but like I think they're going to aim 60 for quality, 120 FPS for performance, and the handheld is going to be 30 quality, 60 for performance. From that perspective, they both have two low power Zen 6 cores for the operating system, so that is the same. Also, the amount of RAM should be very similar. So probably all devs have to do between the two consoles is like cut the textures in half because the resolution will be lower, and then call it a day. I'll fit. And then so 4 to 7, it seems like Zen 6C cores. That difference I think could be the difference between 60 and 120. Although I imagine a couple games might have to go down to 30 instead of 120. We'll see. But for the most part, I think the CPU is enough that you just run at a lower frame rate. The RAM difference should be small enough that you just cut textures in half or whatever, and it doesn't matter. And this also is where I bring in my argument again of, well, the Xbox Series S was too soon. The problem with the Series S to X, one of the problems, RAM was the main one, in my opinion, but was when you have the base resolution of the Series XP, let's call it 1800 P60, 1440 P60. If you go to a third or a fourth that resolution, you're now down to like 900, 720p. Like you're going to a resolution that just isn't very good. If you're at 4K 120, 1080p 60 is an eighth the resolution. That is an eighth the pixels. And so that's why I think this is the first generation where this is easy to do, because 1080p, we can all agree 1080p 60 isn't perfect, but it certainly is like where you're like kind of okay. 4K 120, because you're doubling the frame rate, and 4K is 4 times the resolution of 1080p. That is an 8 times the pixels. So if you have, a fourth the compute units clocked lower, I don't actually know that will be hard to scale, because if that's going to be the main factor, don't you think? Like, you see what I'm saying?
I think it's going to be less of a big deal, but there's just different ways you build a game if you're targeting PC versus console
or like a stronger version versus a weaker handheld.
Yeah, like just in terms of like taking advantage of the I/O of PS5, right?
I assume they'll both have the same I/O controllers, though, right?
Well, they have to for compatibility.
They have to.
They're going to have. I'm just saying, like, I'm not worried about that for PlayStation, but I'm saying even when games that maybe would have taken advantage of that to an insane degree maybe won't exist, because now they're planning to port their games to PC in a year or two.
Oh, wait, are you saying so? It's not like the PS6 will be the baseline. Now the handheld will be the baseline, so they're not going to make the 6090 go like 10 times because they have.
Well, and also they're making the game expecting to port it to PC, so they're not going to take advantage of. Like, consoles are interesting, and when they set standards, they get widespread, and then they get adopted by more hardware, right? Like, whatever you can. The Xbox 360 was the first GPU with unified shaders, right? And you end up with whatever. You have these different GPU hardware configurations or whatnot, or how many cores or that are going into a console, and then it moves the standard up on PC so that they can develop more for it. Or you have like hardware feature sets that are added to GPUs at certain points in time in console, and then it becomes more standardized on PC. It forces people that had GPUs without the feature set to gradually upgrade. Things just, they need to be adopted widespread, and then get developers on board so that they can actually take market share. Like, the saddest thing is, like, with companies like AMD, it doesn't feel like they actually have the power to push these things on PC like they've tried in the past. It's interesting because everyone's like, well, AMD needs to make their new feature, right? Like I watch videos all the time. They need something to get ahead of DLSS. And I'm like, I remember them trying that. I remember them trying that with Mantle, True Audio, several. They
Dress
had
effects,
Tress
air.
Effects.
Yeah.
They had a run where they were trying to get ahead, but the problem is that they did not have enough market share to any of this become standard. And Nvidia was actually they were dominating by by taking advantage of weaknesses in APIs and stuff. Because during that era, the DirectX 11 era, Radeon had to probably put 30 to 40% more hardware in a GPU to match the equivalent NVIDIA card. So they would have to make their card theoretically 30 to 40% more powerful to get the exact same performance. That's why a 480, an RX 480 is like literally just more hardware than a 1060. Mm-hmm. Right? It was in the DirectX 11 era, there was a draw call stall that hit AMD hard so that they were behind in every game. And the more draw call heavy games were, the more that was an issue for that generation of hardware. But when you're the underdog in that situation, first of all, you have to sell bigger GPU dies for less money, which isn't a great way to make money. And you can't push features. You're not the vendor that has the capability of pushing features because you have no capability for adoption. The only reason that Mantle survived at all is because it became
Vulkan.
became Vulkan. It became the groundwork for Vulkan, and that became completely open and widespread. But it's interesting that you can't talk about consoles and PC and hardware without talking about feature sets, standards, and what's moving things along. Like there's no individual component in the PS5 that is better than a modern PC. Modern PCs are better.
Well, an expensive modern PC, but yeah.
Yeah, well, like throw in a 9800 X3D and whatever 4090 or
a
whatnot.
CPU that costs as much as the PS5 almost.
I'm just saying that like you can put more hardware in it than that, but you will still end up with frame hitches and traversal stutters and like also like shader caching issues.
Yeah.
The shader caching issues are only an issue because like you can't do it another way on PC. You either have them have a huge load screen where it compiles all their shaders at the beginning, and then you have to redo that every time they install a new driver, or an update for the game, or on consoles that's all pre-done while they ship the build because that hardware is set. They don't have to do any of that. So when you get that game, you run it on your console, you don't have any of those problems.
But so here's an interesting argument, I think, too, on why this might be the right time for Sony to do for anyone to do a handheld, frankly, because Xbox is kind of doing one. I think there's a chance here that they know this is going to be like a decade of catch up. Like they know that they were all hoping we'd move to SSDs right away. We were all hoping we would all move to whatever amount of cores you want to say you need and amount of RAM. But unfortunately, Nvidia is still shoveling 8 gigabyte GPUs that are starting to have trouble booting 1080p games. You have, they're finally going to kill the PS4 off, it sounds like, next year. We're finally getting these games like Borderlands 4, Battlefield 6, Death Stranding 2. These are not on PS4. And I do wonder if there's Sony is almost realizing there were two ways they could have gone next gen, really, in my opinion. They could have gone for like a $900 console that does 8K 120 or something silly. Or they can go for a tiered system where they have a cheaper option, a more portable option, and then they also have just a decent upgrade that is the baseline for everything you would need for next gen AI, ray tracing, and that's it. We're not going to try to do 8K, and we're just going to try to go for, again, we'll see what they charge for it. I mean, Microsoft's charging $900 for they're not an Xbox handheld. So I don't know what Sony will think they can get away with, but if they want to, these things can be pretty cheaply priced. And I think they think this is the time to do that because we're at diminishing returns. It's still going to take years for developers to get completely done with hard drives. I mean, you still have the PS5 out there that's going to be supported a long time. I just wonder if they realize having a budget offering, but one that's capable of next gen AI, ray tracing, all of that this is the time to do it because we really are in a time of transition again. And we really weren't last gen where we were just kind of like better PS4. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I also think that they realize that the PS5 will never hit the Switch's market size because it doesn't have a handheld variant. Handhelds they're important, right? For just the social aspect of video games. We're all out and about more and don't, or sneaking in a bit of a game before bed or whatever on a train commuting, and there's moments there that a handheld, like a really good handheld or whatever your phone or whatnot, is going to be what dominates that time. So I think that they're seeing now that the chance of breaking 100 million
Mm.
easily on a device that doesn't have some portable component
Or
is,
just isn't more of an ecosystem of options, you know?
yeah, is going to be a harder thing to do. So it's the scenario that Sony's in. So you're probably right that if anything there was, this would be a good time for it, because and maybe it comes back to the Series S argument, because the Series S was really two hardware generations too early. So the Series S, if the hardware had machine learning acceleration to a more noticeable
And
degree,
I think what
it,
you're touching on, don't get just to be clear, is I believe there was literally a quote from Phil Spencer or someone at Microsoft when they announced it that they're like, "This is the last generation. Everything's just going to scale." And I think they were off. It is not, because it can't really do ray tracing. It can't do AI. And they thought this is it, and then everything just gets to a higher resolution. And I think they're just a gen too soon for that to really be the baseline as well.
yeah, well, look at like what people can do with the 2060 by just taking the resolution down to nothing,
Hmm.
and
But
then
it has
using
tensor
DLSS.
cores and ray tracing
It has
cores.
the
So
hardware features to compensate for that, right? So that's what I mean by like the Series S was like two hardware Radeon generations too early, because
right.
like FSR4 versus DLSS, and maybe some people will disagree with me on this. I think it's the diminishing returns in terms of upscaler quality. There's going to be other things that tie along, right? Like everything that I've played with or seen, FSR4 falls between the DLSS 3 and 4 models. It's right between the two. Some things it's better at, some things it's slightly worse at, but like this is like nitpicking.
Hmm.
If you're sitting and you're playing a game on it, you will not notice. You did notice when you went to FSR2 or the base 3, you would notice between doing that and DLSS. But with 4 and DLSS 3, like I'd say FSR 4 wins almost every time. And DLSS 4 also takes more of a performance hit like FSR 4,
Hmm.
but you get better visual qualities. But this is hardware feature set now where even if that algorithm changes, you can switch out the DLL, right? Which everyone's playing around with. You have
Right. They are now
optiscale,
at
you
the
have
new
all of
baseline
these
as
things.
well of that.
Well, and this is, I know that there's AI questions coming up and what's the best use for it and whatnot. And I don't necessarily want to jump around like crazy unless you want me to, but because you might just want to read the question outright for the context. But
Well, let's get to the AI. Let's make sure we start getting through some of the more straightforward performance questions. Then Rodrigo Ferreira, Maciel, and Dark Helmet, I combined their questions right in, and they say about the new console generation: if the leaks about the 10x RT and 2.5 times raster over base PS5 turn out to be correct, what would this new level of power make possible in terms of visuals, systems, and designs in new games if that became the new baseline? And also, will games even be able to make use of all that performance, considering they will probably have to support PS5 for God knows how many years in the future? Yeah, my own thoughts on that. And finally, if a game were designed from the ground up for only ray tracing, do you think next-gen GPUs will actually have the power to do 4K 60 path tracing? Well, Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition already does. I mean, that is a game that is built ground up for it,
yeah, you
right?
have things with custom engines that are doing really interesting things. I
That
personally
does it on
think,
PS5, so.
with the PS3 generation, it was deferred rendering that created a midway generation, huge graphic bump. With PS4, it was really async compute and a lot of baked lighting solutions with proper bounce that bring things to the next level. I think personally, my thoughts in terms of all of what I'm taking in, reading, and whatnot in the last however many years, I'm starting to think we haven't done everything that can be done with motion vectors, and like all of the setup that you do for FSR, DLSS, and this, right? The reality is that there's things that we have not moved to this space that maybe we need to move to this space. This part of the pipeline that we're isolating to be processed differently. So basically, this is where we add upscaling. Is this we set up motion vectors, there's masking, so like it looks for silhouettes of objects, it has smart things to kind of create layers as it goes, and then it uses motion vectors to predict where the next thing's going to be, masks things out appropriately, and then we have this space, right, where and this is where we get reconstruction and stuff starts to be able to be added into this, because we have data and in theory we can put something better than what's actually being asked for. in that space, right? Like it's this weird thing where we've put in all of these inputs in game engines now that create more opportunities than I would say just there's like maybe there's no reason, and maybe there is a reason. Maybe someone like really technical that's playing around this understands this, or maybe it's just a reason we need to sort out a couple things and it will work. But like maybe we can move all of our particles into that space rather than having them in scene and trying to deal with them. Maybe AI should be actually what's generating our particle direction based on motion vectors, inputs, and masking that's coming in, right? There could be other things that we're not thinking about yet that will use these inputs in this space, like ray reconstruction, right? The amount of rays being sent into the scene is not enough to make the reflection look as good as it possibly can be. So they use a AI algorithm in that space to make a better rendered reflection than what the inputs are actually calling for. And there's probably more things that we can do in that space that we haven't thought of yet. Maybe it's, one of the biggest things in general in games is, transparencies, alpha transparencies, blending, semi-transparent things. The performance cost on that could be really high. So maybe we just take all semi-transparent, transparent objects and we render them as an AI pass in our DLSS or FSR or whatever. I mean, then we're getting into a different thing because what happens if it's a different vendor or whatnot. But I'm just saying that I could see there being interesting thing in the space. I know there's a question later about whether or not we're going to be doing like generated dialogue or whatnot. I think the problem is that like people could accidentally say very offensive things just by strange word order that developers could be liable for that they have no ability to trace. Or it can maybe it will hurt quest progression because it will say something that's trying to give you insight to something, but it's just the wrong information or it's slightly off, or, there's lots of weird things that are really hard to QA and develop for in that space. But, if we're talking about particles or, particles, reflections, semi-transparent objects and things like that, maybe it's better to move something like that to that space where we either add a couple more inputs into our whatever DLSS pass so that it has more things to play with when it's generating whatever pixels are necessary to fill it. But I don't know if we fully explored what's possible in that space. So that's kind of my guess, with maybe also another reason why systems like the Series S were like 2 hardware generations too early. Because once you get those inputs, then you can start, when you do the engine setups and you get the inputs in place, then you can start scrutinizing quality, reducing the quantity of things that are being rendered in that pass or generated like asynchronously while you're doing other things. But there could be some really interesting places to play with that particular hardware. Ray reconstruction is a good example of that. If what I understand about how it works is correct, maybe I'm wrong. But I think that there's going to be more opportunities like that. And, I think DLSS was already playing with this with faces. Like the problem with human faces in game rendering is that we're built out of like millions and millions of little fuzzy assets, real humans. Like our rim of our eye, like is not perfectly cut. So whenever you model something in 3D that's trying to look hyper realistic, it never looks fully realistic because it's made out of tons of rigid assets in that space.
And all we do is try to have there be more and more triangles so it looks less rigid, right?
But then it's still, you're building things out of rigidity. Yeah. So, which is like, when you have ideas like, Gaussian splat, or like you have these concepts and it's like, it might actually be a better way to render these features because it will create some of the more organic processes and shapes along the way. Like, my hair is not alpha cards or, splines or any of these.
Rasterization is very good at making skyscrapers, but if you have a face with hair, it's really not an efficient way to do it.
If you have a game with all robots and skyscrapers, you can make that look real. Like,
you can make it look photorealistic. That's why Death Stranding often does, I think, by the way. But so it sounds like, if I may, it sounds like you're kind of saying, like, if we agree that at least this PS6 handheld is enough to, like, brute force with FSR4, assuming they update it or whatever, its way to like getting you as good or better image quality of PS5 games, that actually you seem to think that because all of these consoles, including Xbox Magnus, will be able to fundamentally do how you render differently in the future, like it doesn't sound like you're sure what exactly is possible, but you could see the potential for some games that really went for it.
I don't think we're done with motion vectors, masking, and like everything that's done in that particular pass.
You're like, we're saying there's fundamental things that these could just probably do substantially better. Like
we built inputs into our engines now, right?
We've just got the inputs. We haven't even used them really. Yeah.
Well, we use them for reconstructing the image, right? We do use them. But we haven't used them for everything that you can use them for. I don't think that we're there yet. I think that the good thing is that almost every game is using them now. Any game with upscaling, right? Now you're getting weird situations with like legacy games or games with different development mindsets, like let's say Persona or Metaphor Refantasio. They have their custom engine that just it doesn't have any modern features into it, which is why you get weird things like Metaphor Refantasio is by the main team, right? From Atlas, and it's the most aliased native game I've ever seen in my life because it doesn't have it doesn't have modern engine inputs and setups. And like TSR is another thing. Some people hate TSR because it's blurry and whatnot, but the inputs are useful for whatever it is that we're going to be plugging in the future, right? So meanwhile, you have Persona 3 Reload, which was done in Unreal Engine, and like in terms of image quality, it's way cleaner and clearer, right? So we're at this point now where as long as developers are using or modifying their engine to have these inputs, there's a heck of a lot of things we can do with that in the future, but it needs to be completely standardized. But it's accelerating quickly. Like that's one of the most fastest moving features that exists is building in the inputs to be used by these AI upscalers, but hopefully it's not just AI upscalers forever. It's going to be other things as well. And there's going to be some genius writing some paper, right, for whatever Nvidia or whatnot that's going to have some ideas of what to do with these inputs. And maybe, we have to add a couple more inputs into that. But that will create maybe a new need for a hardware generation or two. But I don't think that what we do going forward is going to need a different math. Let's say once you have like FP4 int 4, I think that like most things are just going to be essentially using those. I don't think we're going to need to go to like FP2 or int 2 because it's just the precision's too low, right? So
yeah, but no, it's just so big. Again, that's interesting because it's like that's kind of what I'm suspecting is like RDNA 2 just wasn't in the previous gen consoles what we're going to be using and building from for a very long time. RDNA 5, maybe 4 arguably, and basically Lovelace and later is kind of what's modern. And like until that's uniform, like once you get there, this is something that you can scale a very long time. But so again though, let me see here. Actually, I can probably just ask this question. This piece of content is brought to you by FlexiSpot and their Lotus recliner chair. With a 20.9-inch seat width and 9.8-inch armrest width, this recliner provides ample space for various sitting positions, whether upright, sideways, or cross-legged. This makes it perfect for daily relaxation like reading, watching TV, or entertaining my dog with how effortless it is to use the recliner functions. Plus, it has swivel and rocking mechanisms that offer ultimate comfort, helping you release stress after work like a warm embrace. Just like my girlfriend does, where she likes to actually play her Switch 2 on it, and then when she's not gaming, this chair has very thoughtful additions like a storage compartment that's very low profile, very unassuming, that she can place her Switch 2 in for, again, easy storage when she's not using it in her office. Which, speaking of her office, it was incredibly easy for her and my dog to assemble it there with the given directions, and it perfectly matches the aesthetic of the room. Very stylish, and it even came with a box her cat can play in, which is a very nice touch from FlexiSpot. So if you want to support Moore's Law is Dead and need a stylish and cozy lounge recliner that comes with a variety of additional features you can choose from on their website, check it out by clicking on the link below. And don't miss out, because you can right now use my exclusive code LOTUS30 to get $30 off plus free shipping. Doing so helps the channel, and it also gets you the best price available on this awesome chair. So support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out the FlexiSpot Lotus recliner today. Yeah. All right. Chris Rich writes in, and I think he asks this question every time you're on. He says, let's say you were in the early planning stages for a game that would initially launch on the PS6. would you consider using path tracing? Would it depend more on the type of game or more on what performance and quality was possible? When porting to other platforms with much weaker RT hardware, wouldn't you have to create a normal rasterized version of the game? Well, no, you probably just run at 720p 30. I mean, honestly, but so would it really be worth using path tracing in the first place? So again, just trying to quantify this the previous question by adding on this one here, like the hardware you're seeing, it sounds like you think there's more possibilities than you can really account for in what's possible next gen.
Well,
But
let me
do you think they can?
interject
Do
a
you think
little
they
bit.
can do the full path tracing?
Well, let me interject a little bit. Like, so Switch 2 has some games shipping, right? That like Fast RMX and with lower profiles, like lower performance profiles of DLSS than anything that exists in PC
Mm-hmm.
because it has the inputs. So they were able to scale down the feature, right? But still get half decent results with it by having the right inputs, having the right feature set. So there was an ability there to scale down the feature itself to deal with more meager hardware, right? More contended hardware. When you have, I would say, like in regards to the question, if I was making a game the way that I wanted, it would depend on the type of game that it is. Like if it's a multiplayer game, I'm going to say no outright because I'm going to want as
Even with
maximum
above
performance.
like 5080 ray tracing capabilities, you still wouldn't do path tracing.
Well, like if you look at the games that take off, right? Like I don't think Marvel Rivals would have taken off if it was max 60 FPS.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just don't think it would have. For competitive games like that, you do need to be able to push the ceiling to 120 to I'd say even plus 200 FPS to really make the game feel the way that you want it to feel. There's been a bunch of games. I can't think of a game with a 60 FPS cap like just a hardware requirement 60 FPS cap because it was just too heavy that really took off in the multiplayer sphere. That's just, I guess that's me just guessing. Maybe there is, but I'm trying to think of one and I can't think of one. Every game that has, even like I'd say Rivals is that's an
Right,
example
and
that does.
you could almost argue it's more of a PC issue because you just still are going to have all these people on 1060s, right? And that's really the thing probably holding back. Would you
Well,
say next
they'll
gen?
feel like they can play and be part of the team running at 60 FPS with low settings, right? But like if you ship a game and they're at 10 FPS and then their friends are at 60 FPS, no one's having a good time, right? Like the friends that want to run at 200 FPS are at 60 and the friends that don't. If I was making a single player game where, you're not, there's nothing competitive about it or whatnot, and you're just, like I just finished Silk Song
Mm-hmm.
and that game runs at 120 on the Switch 2. But my
Hmm.
kids would kick me off the Switch 2 at some points in time because they wanted to play Tears of the Kingdom or whatnot on it. And then I had to go back to my Switch 1 because I said what I just purchased it on. And now I'm back to 60 and I'm noticing the input latency difference. I mean, it was an OLED, so that you get back some low latency by just the screen's response. But I was losing on a boss fight earlier
Oh,
than I was on the 120 hertz because you just have less input latency. So if I'm making a lightweight game, I'd want to target frame rate first. Path tracing is only going to be really interesting if we can do it in a super lightweight way, I think. And maybe
but that's my
it's
question: is do you think? Because this is the thing I'm wondering about next gen is like I don't know if I've done this rant, but it's like a rant I've been thinking of doing on a live stream, like where people are talking about like, oh well, this game, Alan Wake 2 doesn't run well. It's like, yeah, but Metro Exodus does, and I just think, isn't there a chance that if you have the next version of like Dice's engine, Decima, whatever Naughty Dog uses, like if they just built it from the ground up as the baseline being something that's 10 times better ray tracing than the PS5 and it was actually optimized for it, could we be stunned with what's possible? Because again, Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition runs okay on my laptop, and that's crazy that it's doing path tracing. And I think a lot of path tracing games were like half optimized for Nvidia, but not even half optimized, just kind of done to do it. And like, what happens if you're not just doing it to brag about it? You're actually like, we rewrote the engine to efficiently do it. I mean, and then you throw that on console hardware like Xbox Magnus, which might be, I don't know, we'll see, like 15 times better ray tracing than the
yeah,
PS5.
it would suck if you still have to make the raster version of the game. Like some of the benefits of RT or path tracing. I mean, path tracing is the inverse, right? RT is from the light source until it bumps into whatever, and
Hmm.
then path tracing is from the camera until it hits lights. But when you have like path tracing or whatnot, you like if you have to still make the raster, some of the beauty of doing like a fully path traced game outright is just not having to bake anything into your texture data, having to do like less shadow bakes or having to do
Right. It
less
could be
ambient.
quite a bit more efficient.
Well, in terms of development, like there's so many things that are baked, like your AO maps, your ambient occlusion maps in all of your textures. So it's an additional bit of texture space, texture read, complexity of your shaders, just putting ambient occlusion. So ambient occlusion, for anyone who doesn't know, is where light runs out of energy. So anytime you just occlude yourself, light bounces and then it runs out of energy trying to get into nooks and crannies. So you can get images that are just full out ambient occlusion passes and they look really cool. Like was Unfinished Swan, I think was a PS3 game that was essentially just all ambient occlusion. Like the game visually, their art style was just an ambient occlusion pass. But you would do that, you get that for free from the path tracing because it would just run out of juice as it goes in. You would get that natural darkening in corners or under arms or like under your neck or where any surfaces meet each other is where you would get that. And we could do away with some of that. There's other aspects like just having natural bounce lighting. Some of the problems we're facing right now with early path tracing is something called light leakage, where light goes through walls and stuff. There's a lot of optimizations we do in games that we might have to undo too. Like we do a lot of one-sided objects, or we do you do one-sided shadow or one-sided lighting for an optimization pass on specific objects if you never see the other side of it. But then if you're expecting to do path tracing on it, we can get light leakage from doing stuff like that. So, and then it's how many rays, what level of scrutiny do we need to do these kind of things. So there's some stuff where you get some like not performance gains, development gains from being in a fully path traced workload. And there's some things where it hurts optimizations that we're already doing. I think one of the funniest ones of these was the 3DS because there's so many objects in games that are secretly flat or like distant objects that are flat. And then you have something like a silly like the 3DS, but now you can't do that cheat on that asset anymore because it would be obvious that it's a flat asset, but the way that it renders onto a TV where it's all flat, it doesn't bother that. So,
Oh, I see. Like with a 3DS and 3D mode. Yeah, that is fun.
Yeah, in 3D mode, you can't build objects a certain way that you might build them if it was purely raster, purely 2D, that you do when something's in 3D. And we're finding similar things, some things with when we go to path tracing models based on some optimizations that we've done, like one-sided lighting. Right now, it's more expensive to have that base asset in because you have to do two-sided lighting on it. You might have to do the back half of geometry on a wall that you wouldn't have had to before for light to bounce properly, right? Like things like that. So I don't know. It's a complex thing. I think it's fun. So there's a part of me that would like to play in all of these kind of spaces just from how interesting it is to interact with new features and see what's cool. Like I like the idea of doing like a pixel art game with interesting bounce light and proper rim lights and stuff like that. I think that there's something fun that we haven't fully explored in that space yet. You also get weird things like Lego Builder's Journey, which was a game that used ray tracing and path tracing on like Lego blocks and a way that made them come to life.
Or Minecraft, which similar concept, which just a ray tracing add-on made it look incredible. Well, okay, so let me just ask this question then. Do you think the visual, and I don't know if it can be just visual, but like, do you think the leap from PS5 and Series X to PS6 and Xbox Magnus is going to feel bigger than 4 to 5?
Yeah, I think if we do
despite only 2.5 times as much raster, you think it'll feel bigger?
Well, I think if we start exploring some of the things that maybe I'm dead wrong on it, so take me with a grain of salt. I'm speculating wildly. I'm not a leaker. I don't have access to any of these things. I'm not talking to Sony or whatnot. I'm just reacting on the fly to what I'm hearing from you and thinking about what I might think might be theoretically possible. So I'm not a source of an expert or whatnot. I think it's fun to explore these kind of concepts. But when I hear something about like that, I'm thinking that we haven't done everything we can do with our inputs for our AI upscaling. And when we figure out some of the things that we're doing in those spaces, once we have acceleration, like rendering acceleration for any kind of machine learning workloads, and I'm not saying this on an AI side. I'm saying it more on like a rendering
Hmm.
feature. Like I don't think people think about DLSS as AI the way they think of like generative AI and whatnot. It's a different
Right. Yeah.
space.
To clarify, you're not saying like what, things can we generate a bunch of times. We're saying literally we have all these inputs now and the hardware to use them.
Yeah.
What else could we be doing to make better graphics or more efficient graphics?
Yeah, like what are we missing? What are we doing in the rendering process that's heavy that if we offloaded it to this space might not only make the game more performant, but make that aspect of the game look better. Like anyone who's made explosions in a game,
Hmm.
right? Or particle effects in the game know how faked it is most of the time. It's most explosions are like you make a bunch of different things and you have some shaders or variables or input variables based on the setting that make it render differently or distort it differently so you don't notice the fact that it's the same assets playing in lots of ways. Like the funniest thing between being a game developer and a gamer is when you look in an engine and see how many different shaders and effects are targeting one asset. That'll be like some weird hazy texture and it's using it for like 50 different things. Like there's funny things you see like that when you're behind the scenes in games, but maybe there's some better way to handle that. Like when you see a game like Dark Souls remastered on PS5, which created used I think it used Tempest acceleration to do a complete wind system
Mm.
through all of the levels so that wind flowed the way it naturally would, and when particles interacted in that space, it operated like that. But I'm like cross my brain slightly, maybe it's wrong, but when we have motion vectors, inputs already, masking for all of these setting things in place for using our AI upscaling, I don't know why we maybe couldn't try exploring having our particles rendered in that space as well, using those variables, like knowing where motion's coming from or what's happening to, whisper around players in a more believable way without having to do physics calculations
Which
on it
actually
the
might
same way.
save performance then. Yeah.
Yeah, like so I'm just wondering what we can do that will be perceptually identical and or better without the performance cost.
What I would recommend, I touched on this very briefly in my PS6 home console leak, but the episode people would actually want to check out is, let's see here, it would be episode 201 with an Infinity Ward dev, someone specifically in charge of the explosions in a lot of games at Infinity Ward. And he explained to me, actually, the previous time he was on as someone who worked at Sony Santa Monica first, that like literally like in Demon Souls, like if you cast a spell with a wand or a Hogwarts, right, Legacy, it literally there's a folder of it different blue spells, and it's the same spell, and there's just 30 different ways it can twirl off the wand. That's it, and that takes up RAM. That's why The Witcher 3, the fire spells looked a little more, if I may, like Spyro in PlayStation 1, where it's the same fire movement every time he blows. And today
Yeah.
you would never see that. It's because we pull from like a folder of dozens of different fires so that it doesn't look like the same fire every time. But it's not really reacting with physics 90% of the time in games. It's just they guess which way it would look based on probably, like you said, two hazy things to calculate it. If we had AI,
Like
you could do snapshots, right? And like try to simulate it directly quickly.
I don't think we can brute force the rendering problem the way that we have in the past. Like the biggest progresses we see in almost everything are side channels, where the ways we didn't think about looking at the problem,
And this gives
right?
you, these next gen consoles will give you more ways of solving things creatively than you could before.
Yeah, well, and it's like when we switched to deferred rendering, it broke a lot of things, right? Because essentially what happened is every time we added a light before that, we were just rendering everything over and over and over again. And then we were like, why don't we just render all these lights all together? And it's like, well, we can't do this, this, and this. So it broke our previous anti-aliasing solutions. It broke several of the solutions because it created a passive lighting at the end of the pipeline instead of having it where it was at the beginning, where anything that changed it had to re-render it over and over again. So we had a very expensive lighting solution. We changed it for making all lights way cheaper, but it caused problems with other aspects of our pipeline. There's things that we missed about forward rendering. So a lot of people have come back to like mixed. They have like half forward, half deferred kind of setups for how they do their lighting. But we have these innovations, and I think that we're going to have a similar one with our inputs for machine learning, and we don't know what we're putting in there yet, and how we're rendering rigid, hard assets there probably is a better way for it that will look more natural. The problem is just stability and cohesion. We need to make sure that it always looks like that object. We can't have things changing on a frame by frame basis. So we need to be smart about what aspects of this we're accelerating this way, where it's completely unnoticeable and it's just purely beneficial versus things that maybe are a bit different. Like, we all see right now with anything like AI faces generated and things, the second they go to like an oblique angle and then it just loses all likeness or whatnot, right? There's certain breaking points for these things currently. And doing it in real time just means you have way less time to figure out how to do these things. So, but we may be able to compensate for that with better inputs. So if we have good inputs for it, we can fix some of these problems. The difference between doing something on a video and in a game engine is that we can give a game engine cues of where it should be doing things. Whereas a video, it's just trying to pull everything apart in a group of pixels and then figure out what to do things to and what not to. So there could be some really cool things that we can do in this kind of space.
Jackals writes in and says, "Hello, Tom and Bryan. I'd like to hear a dev's thoughts about developing for next gen. How can a team guesstimate for AI features? How can you approximate the method of AI implementation in games, or will you at all? After what time is it possible to see first implementations of AI in games? Thank you." And I think this is interesting because I've heard from a few people now that like basically Sony's gone to devs and said, here's what the next gen's capable of. Have at it, whatever you're working on that you think could be a launch PS6 game. This is the AI capabilities, and just keep that in mind when you're making your game. I'm wondering, like, if you could give us perspective on, like, what do you, if you were to see this stuff, which I guess now you have because I just sent you, like, I just leaked some of this PlayStation 6 stuff. Like, I guess the AI thing is still a little unknown, but I think, let me say this. We can safely say this. I think about the AI capabilities of the PS6. The PS5 Pro has a kind of a weird hybrid architecture that's like some like kind of like RDNA 3.5 on crack combined with parts of 4, because it's capable of 300 tops of AI performance. The PS5 Pro is. The 7900 XTX is 246. So we're talking like 30% more tops in the PS5 Pro than a 7900 XTX that has way more compute units. So it's like that's the way Sony, I don't know. So I don't know if through NPU or through that next gen, but I would say if you were to scale that up with the amount of performance, we could be talking about thousands of tops potentially, or an NPU at least that's dedicated with 100 tops or so. If you were told that, Bryan, what would come to mind to do? What would you do with that?
Yeah, I would say that the difference between the 7900 XTX and the 9070 XT, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think that the machine learning capabilities are probably that different between the two. The problem is that you can't queue the 7900 XTX properly.
To be fair, the 9070 XT apparently has 1557 tops.
So it's way more tops. I guess. I mean, like if you were using
the RDNA 5 and PS6 and Magnus, I don't know what they're going to be. See, that's when I wonder if you even need an NPU. If you can get the GPU on the PS5 to like 10,000 tops, I mean, why do you need an NPU?
I guess I wasn't thinking in tops. I was thinking in compute, right? Like anything that you assemble in compute. The biggest difference between if you tried to do, you could probably do a FSR DLSS something in compute on the 7900 XTX, let's say, right? Like it has enough compute to do that. The problem is you can't schedule it, right? In the pipeline the same way, because I'm speculating widely, so I apologize if this is completely wrong. But you can't schedule it the way that you like. The biggest difference between having a different point of the unit, first of all, you're not competing with resources when it's a separate NPU on the die. Now you schedule it, and it's done by the NPU without hitting your resources as hard. Whereas when you do it in compute, you don't know how much time it's going to take, and you're competing for everything else that's trying to be rendered by the frame, which is why something like the 7900 XTX will be so vastly beaten in these kind of things by something like the 90. And same with the PS5 versus the PS5 Pro, right? And then even more so with Magnus and whatnot, is you just have, the more it's a like dedicated die that we're scheduling tasks to in the pipeline, the more we can utilize that asynchronously or concurrently with what's going on in the frame without competing for resources. So it's important for like you just kind of you framed the scenario when you said, well, maybe the PS5 Pro can do it, but then I'm like, the resource contention is the issue, right?
Well, and I'm
Or
also I didn't realize the 9070 XT's tops was that much higher.
that was
So yeah,
faster.
so for all I know, actually we're talking like 3,000, 5,000 tops in the
Yeah,
PS6, and
yeah.
you have just enough in the PS5 Pro that you could do it install, and then the PS5 base is screwed. So they probably just wouldn't bring the game to PS5, is what I would guess,
Why? We'll see.
if it required on
We'll
that,
see. Yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, just in terms of like for fun, like what would be the first thing you would want to use AI for? I mean, I think the examples I give are like, could you simulate tears in clothing on all of the clickers in The Last of Us? That way, the tear doesn't always look the same. Like that's a
Yeah,
sort
you
of
would.
simple thing you could do.
Yeah, you might be able to do something like that. I mean, the I'm just trying to think, like, one of the performance things you do is bake down meshes, right? So, like, typically, if you have a monster with limbs that come off, you have baked meshes that
Yes.
switch those kind of things, and then that everything has to be stored somewhere too, right? So, like, you simplify things to where they can break, and then you store it in RAM. Like, there's a reason we don't see that many Metal Gear Risings out there. It's a complicated thing to have things be able to break down and decimate
Yeah, like
on
where he
so
could
many
cut
levels.
things into tiny little parts. Yeah, that's actually yeah.
Yeah, it's just not something we see that commonly, but it could be a cool place. It seems like the best uses for AI currently are things in that space that I'm talking about with motion vectors and proper masking and occluding. Um, it would be interesting to get like generative content to some extent. Like I'm interested in it in terms of texture compression, like new paradigms to just not eat up as much RAM as is currently being eaten up by assets. Like most people playing games don't realize that like 90% of what's in there is like music and textures, right? That is filling up with their entire RAM pool. Like geometry is nothing. It's like kilobytes for geometry because it's essentially vertex. It's just an atlas of vertex points. But when you have textures and whatnot, where you have to literally have pixel data, that takes up information. So there can be a lot of theoretical savings in terms of that to get performance up. If I was to just want to play around with it, then I would be looking like if I didn't have to make a game and I was just to play, that's different too, because I would love to just like take some of these inputs, play around, try to see what the heck it is. And then if that sparks something, make a game out of that. That'd be a fun place to play. But I don't, I don't know. I guess I don't foresee, I would be too, I guess, worried about generative aspects in terms of just
Mm.
generating something that is off-putting or unsettling or whatnot. Then
Yeah, you'd have to
like you
have a
could end
lot
up
of
having someone
safeties.
talk about someone's butt or something in a weird
Yeah.
way when like people already do this with
Yeah.
chatbots.
The AI
Like
forgets that Ellie is Joel's daughter or something
yeah,
like.
like it could just be there's so many places like weird or you like what we see with current language models, you talk it out of something and then you lead it down a weird rabbit hole. Like you can do that to
Yeah.
some extent to AI, all AI low level models right now. So I don't know if you want to ship something that's capable of
It sounds like you
that.
think the first wave of games, I mean, I'm guessing there will be a couple innovative, like, I don't want to say gimmicks, but it's like, ooh, we found this one thing we can do in Horizon Forbidden West 3 that dynamically changes how they talk a little bit. But you think the true wave of like good AI usage isn't going to be 27. It's going to be like 2030, like the second wave of games that come to the next gen consoles.
I think it might be more like 2028, 2029. There's going to be some
So just
studio
not the
that just
very first, like you kind of, but I guess my better point would be you, am I wrong? You think the game kind of has to be built with these consoles in mind from the start. It can't just be, they added it
tacked
later.
on. Well, it's like funny we were talking about Borderlands, but we could talk about Borderlands and Nvidia physics features, which they did. I think Borderlands 2 had
They
physics.
did. They do not in this one. I think they did in the pre-sequel as well. I don't remember if they did in Borderlands 3.
So but I'm saying like it was just like a nifty little particle funny dance thing that they had
Yeah.
going in, right? Like you had
The toilets had
this
slime come out. Whoa.
exactly. It was some that and that's kind of when it's tacked on
Mm-hmm.
versus when I like when something's essential to the experience is very very different. like we could have made a lot of games with like way more, I guess, intelligent fluid dynamics, right, with something like that. But you can make a game entirely around fluid
But you
dynamics.
can't unless everything can do it.
Yeah, you can't unless every piece of hardware can support it. So otherwise it's just one person with one GPU gets flashy particles.
All right, wait. Let me play this voicemail here that pivots a little bit more into Xbox and to desktop graphics.
Xbox looks to share the exact same GPU die with AMD next generation. Doesn't this mean by proxy that this will be one of the most programmed to the T GPU dies from developers, since they will have to do that with their Xbox version of their games anyways? If RDNA 4 told people, hey, I'm AMD, I'm a good option too, this die with RDNA 5 could potentially make AMD a household name like Nvidia. This may be the next forever GPU like the 1080 Ti was, since technically it will be supported until the next console generation ends, because it will be in the next Xbox, which will be supported well into the 2030s. Will this die finally give the final push for AMD software adoption? And I say all this just to mention that finally, just like your phones, your refrigerators, and your cars, that AMD is also an Xbox.
Yeah, so what do you think about that? Because that's the thing I've been thinking too. Like, I know that there is, I knew at first when I leaked RDNA 5 info that there's AT0, this is the 6090 competitor, and then there's AT2, this is the Xbox Magnus APU chiplet slash 9070 XT successor. And then besides that, you would have, I eventually found out, yes, there's AT3, AT4 for laptop APUs. Okay, and then I'm like, but I still don't have proof of an AT1. I've seen references that there could be one, but I almost wonder like what the point of that would be when you're going to have this console one be so goddamn optimized. And I like just the economy of scale on AT2, where it might be able to go into at least 20 million Xboxes, tens of millions of desktop cards, and just the optimization around it. And by the way, I'll say this, I don't think I've said this publicly. I've seen some references to the PlayStation 6 APU, and it's like, it basically says like optimized AT2, so it's like a smaller, denser version that in a monolith. Like they basically, there's going to be very similar optimizations to the PS6 to what they would do to AT2 as well. So that's going to also benefit, I think, the software as well, with how many PlayStations will go out with a very similar shader array to what's in the Xbox and a desktop graphics card. But yeah, what do you think about the chiplet being shared between RDNA 5 desktop and the Xbox APU? And just what do you think that means for like economy of scale and optimization?
Um, okay, so I remember like I worked for a while with a dev on that worked on Neo 2.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked to me outright about how they turned off performance optimizations they had
Yep.
done for
And you've
PlayStation
talked
to
about that on
run them.
previous episodes.
Yeah, I'm referencing that for a reason. So just turned off asynchronous compute, turned off some of the optimizations that they had done because they didn't run well on Nvidia. So, and also because they lost they had problems with APIs. So basically they had to ship from Sony's proprietary API for developing games and then ship that over to DirectX 11, which doesn't universally have those feature sets. There's ways maybe you could patch it in or whatnot, but it was easier for compatibility to just turn it off, and AMD did not see any performance advantages that they had already developed.
Mm-hmm.
Like the developer in some
Like
of
they
these
optimize it
instances,
for PS4 Pro, and then they
they
just turn it
made
all off when it comes to PC because they're
they
worried about
made the
Nvidia.
Radeon optimizations, and then they had to turn them off. Either they turned them off because of an API block, because the feature set just doesn't carry over from the API. DirectX 11 doesn't have the full feature set that the PS4 did, right? DirectX 12 has some of it, but it has its own drawbacks. And then so you have Vulkan, DX12, right? I think this is my thought on this. Xbox needs to fix Windows, or they're at high risk of losing their entire landscape, because
Yeah.
everyone that I can't think of anyone that games on Windows that does it because Windows. They feel strapped to the platform. And it's very sad when you have games running on Steam Deck with Wine, right? Or on Linux with Wine that outperform, that Wine being the translation layer that translates DirectX to Vulkan operations, and getting performance increases, not decreases, while translating. So it's so inefficient, DirectX in some instances, that it's more efficient to translate it to another API and take the processing cost of translating it than it is to run it native. So in this scenario where Microsoft has sizable market share with this particular product, with this die, they have fixed Windows, they've fixed their DirectX operating, their API ecosystem, so that optimizations from one perfectly carry to the other, then yes, we could see a situation where AMD cards start performing much better in relationship to Nvidia counterparts just by being more targeted from the console. But to be honest, it would be Sony who is more capable of pushing this than Microsoft. I want Microsoft to be capable of selling this, and they fully will be if they can get 100 million selling console out there. If they can get 100 million selling console with that fixes all of these problems, then yeah.
But at least it will also be on desktop, right? So if it's 20 million Xbox, 20 million, desktop, and Sony isn't the same, but you'd still be having the same features.
We need the API ecosystem.
And you mean just the features, though? I'm sorry, not just the hardware, like the exact same amount of compute units. Like,
no, it doesn't have to be the same quantity of units, but we need the API optimizations. The API optimizations to carry from one to the other. We can't lose our optimizations to the hardware through the API interface. So we need to make sure that Microsoft needs to make sure that they do a really, really good job optimizing Windows, fixing what's going on with there. They probably need to do a clean pass of DirectX, to be perfectly honest with you, is my thoughts. There is a problem in general where we've moved into so many layers of abstraction from understanding what's going on with any of these passes that we're getting less and less able to do things the way that we might like and having them carry across this. But if there's anywhere, it's right now that maybe AMD can push hardware, get some support, get optimizations happening at a feature level, push with Microsoft to make sure that, hey, this is standardized. Any optimizations you do on Xbox carry over to PC. So all that should scale with the size of the hardware, whether it's more compute units or whatnot, should be how much the percentage gains you get with the optimizations. But we shouldn't have to turn off optimizations or reduce features to cross over from one to the other. So I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff like that. And just, NVIDIA's dominance in the market is always going to be a moving force, right? In terms of their ability to sell new features, have them implemented, and they have great reach and support. Like AMD is also good on that. The only one I haven't gone to a conference. I can't remember going to a conference where I didn't meet AMD and Nvidia people. Mm-hmm. You almost always see AMD and Nvidia people. I've almost never met an Intel person, which is
they fired most of them, sadly.
Even before that, when they were the richest people, you'd go to GDC, you'd go to places where Intel should be really pushing for a presence, and you would, you meet Nvidia people or AMD people that you'd chat them up. They would, you'd have beers with them or whatnot, but you would never see that with Intel. And, Nvidia was really good at that too. So there is a certain amount of just outreach, that we need. We need to fix the ecosystem, I would say. Like Windows needs to make sure that, they're not having massive draw call stalls or performance issues where a translation later outperforms their actual native software, where downgrading to Windows 11 runs better than Windows 11 versus Windows 12, right? Where downgrading your Windows increases performance, like Tekia Seti shows over and over
11 to
again,
10,
right?
Yeah,
11 to 10. That's it. So dropping a Windows level shouldn't be doing that, right? Like we need to make sure the ecosystem is working so that AMD can start to get some market share and mind share. I feel like they've built some mind share. I was confused by the most recent Tom Petty research, because when I go
John Petty, yeah.
John Petty, yeah. John Petty research, when you see that its market share is lower, and I'm like, the only thing that makes sense to me in that instance is not gamers graphics cards, because you look at the Amazon top sellers, 90 series is showing up for the first time in there. You look at Newegg,
it's all AMD.
Micro Center, all of these sites, they have.
You even go to the UK or in the Mind Factory, AMD is winning. I mean, I'll say it. I don't know where those numbers are coming from. I can't replicate them. But I've had people behind the scenes tell me there's issues with it. I'll just say it. That's what people are saying behind the scenes.
It might be true, but it might be that they're selling huge lots of discrete GPUs for
AI.
whatever AI
No, that could
servers
be
and
true,
whatnot.
but that's not
So the
gamers.
question is the total volume, then, right? More so than it is the market percentage, right? Because we have this market percentage, but if the total volume is 3 times more than it was a year ago for the same time period, but none of that's going in computers where people are playing video
Yep.
games, that's a different thing. There, I mean, Nvidia is laughing to the bank for sure, but it's just a different. Uh, the term discrete GPU does not mean what it used to mean. In
Especially
terms
because
of
my laptop has Strix Halo, and this doesn't count as a graphics card. Are you freaking kidding me? They even market it for AI. Like, this is not a not graphics card just because it's a
yeah,
laptop. It's stupid. I don't know.
I mean, AMD is dominant in a lot of like with their CPUs and whatnot in every space except OEMs. Like, the second you try to buy like a Dell
They're
Alienware, or you
making
try to get
up ground, but yeah, Intel's still dominant there for sure.
Intel is dominant in all of those
But
spaces. So that
it sounds like what you're saying though is like, um, what's important about them sharing RDNA 5 and seemingly everything from laptop to Xbox to PlayStation, and even literally sharing the exact same graphics card between an Xbox and laptops, is that devs can't ignore the AMD features anymore. It would just be idiotic to turn off these features when everything's using it, and Microsoft's going to have to optimize for the Xbox. So they're going to want it to run well on their console that might just run Windows now.
I think we've already seen some mindshare shift, and I think a good example of that is actually Optiscaler. I don't think AMD had enough mindshare 5 to 6 years ago to motivate developers to make something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just people to make a piece of software. So what that situation is FSR4 is very good, right? But it's not in enough games. So now you have enough people with the product that are excited about it that they're hijacking in every game the inputs for DLSS and XESS so that they can replace it with FSR4. You're getting these scenarios now where people are motivated enough because it's getting enough, enough hardware is falling in gamers' hands, right? When you need to have enough critical mass, right, to actually be able to push these hardware features the way that they are best capable of being used. And maybe we're at the point where people are fed up enough with, some of the problems that are coming their way that they're willing to look at more of an alternative. And, for anyone that is really one side or another, I just recommend just go to YouTube, watch the GDC talk where they break down one frame of Deus Ex Mankind Divided and see everything that goes into a frame,
Mm-hmm.
and just be like, wow, it's amazing that we have two competitors that are capable of doing these kind of things. Because you look at like TSMC and the foundries, it's like every node foundries drop off because they can't keep up with the level of complexity. And this is the situation with GPUs, is that there's so much that they have to do in a frame that it's so hard for anyone to keep up. And there's only really a couple people on earth that are capable of throwing money to the wind at scale to have a chance in this space. Two of them are AMD and Nvidia, and probably the next one's Apple, to be perfectly honest with you, capable of throwing money.
Yeah, I continue to think Apple would be the next one if there was another one.
Yeah, so it's just
because it's not going to be Qualcomm. We already saw that.
Well, they tried. I mean, Qualcomm. I mean, they had a leg up because they bought Radeon Mobile essentially, and then they used the Adreno architecture, and then they used it to build all of their GPUs. So they had kind of like the initial framework to scale from, comparably to other people.
But again, I think just like ARC, they just underestimated how much work it takes to get to where we are in graphics.
Well, this is an interesting question. I don't know if this is in the questions, but there's the talk of the GPU overhead, that the driver overhead that Nvidia is seeing compared to Radeon at this point in time. I know Hardware Unboxed touched on it. Hardware Canucks touched on it.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of
I
people.
think Tech Yes City did too. Yeah.
Yeah. Now people are looking into that. And then it's kind of interesting because we might now have GPUs so advanced, like if they make a 6090 and whatever they name the next gen of Radeon, where the 6090 might actually be 30% more powerful, but for that generation, the Radeon just runs everything better because it hits less
issues.
GPU.
Yeah. It has better driver overhead. I know. And actually, we can talk about this a little bit. So this piece of content is brought to you by the ThermalMaster P3, a thermal camera for both Android and iOS. The P3 thermal imager uses X to the third IR technology to boost its infrared resolution from 25.6 by 192 to 512 by 384, delivering clearer and sharper thermal images integrated with the Razer X Ultra Clear algorithm as well, and the high sensitivity thermal master sensor. It can detect 1 MA PCB leakage and provides reliable imaging for household water leaks, HVAC inspections, approving repairs, industrial assessments. So of course, what I would use it for, just checking out the thermals of my laptops, graphics cards, or just seeing where my dog's been walking around. So if you are interested in this thing, and it was incredibly easy to set up and use with my smartphone, by the way, follow the link in the description to support Moore's Law is Dead and check out the ThermalMaster P3 today. For those who don't know, I mean, like, this is something I Hardware Unboxed discovered, I'd say, with Ampere and the RTX 3000 series in 2020, or it was probably in 2021. And then, I noticed it. I noted it to people. It would pop up in a game every now and then. And then something happened where I noticed it in Battlefield 6. I got the same results Steve did, where I was like, my 4090 almost seems to be frame capped 20% above what the PS5 Pro is capable of in frame rate. This is really, really bad. And guess what? Borderlands 4 comes out. And what do we find if you go below 4K? Boom, 9070 XT is as fast as a 5080. In 1080p, it is almost as fast as a 4090. Like, that is how bad the CPU overhead is in Borderlands 4, as well as what you see, in Battlefield 6. So this seems to be a pattern. It seems to be just about every game coming out now where NVIDIA cards are struggling to run games above 144 frames a second.
Yeah. This is getting to be I'm speculating. I've speculated this for a long time, but one of the issues that we have with like in the DirectX 11 era, NVIDIA stripped out the hardware scheduler when the 10 series of the cards, and then they offloaded it to the driver. I believe this is what was done. So I remember looking into this quite heavily at that time. So we're going to be in this weird situation where, in theory, maybe Radeon could actually compete to a CPU's limit with slightly less hardware than NVIDIA, because NVIDIA can't make more hardware without being CPU bound. They're just going to be CPU bound with their highest end products, no matter what they do, not with their middle range and low end. It's going to be primarily pushed to where you're creating this bottleneck. Like Steve showed in his last video, where he had a scenario where he created it and then he didn't create it by changing game settings and parameters and resolution. So you can operate within this framework, but once you're pushing all the way to the limit of the CPU is where you see it. So it could be interesting, but like Radeon kind of lost a chance this generation.
This would have been if they had an RX 9090 XT, they might just win by default.
Even a 9080 XT. They might have had a lot of situations where a 9080 XT actually matched the 5090 in game.
Well, maybe they still will. There's still supposedly some GDDR7 option they could launch maybe after CES or something.
So a GDDR option would do similar to like an X3D in the case that it would reduce stalls, right? So then the question is, would it reduce enough?
But also clocked faster, like clocked 20% faster. So.
The GPU itself would be clocked 20% faster.
So you'd have a situation where, like, in like heavy ray tracing 4K 120, the 5080 might tie it, but then you're going to get a games like Borderlands 4 where maybe it just beats a 5090. I mean, it now would be the time to do a high-end card if AMD could pull a rabbit out of a hat. Now would be the time.
It's interesting. Like, I think the thing that always frustrated me with the PC space, and if you go back to like our first video, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was just that I always felt just frustrated with, I felt frustrated that the conversation about GPUs was wrong, that we weren't, the word pipeline, like you have a million hardware reviews and the word pipeline doesn't come up once, which just made no sense to me.
That's an interesting question though, because when I put out my PS6 leak, there were a lot of people who I guess didn't notice I said 5090 ray tracing, not 5090 performance. And if I say that the console is close to the 5090 in ray tracing, but 9070 in raster, that means that, no, it isn't a 5090. The 5090 is twice the raster performance, which is why it uses more power and why it's so much bigger and all that.
The 5090 is insane. Like, it's just a giant
But GPU. That's the funny thing too, right? Is I think a lot of people see 5090 and they think it's a monster, but at actual gaming, it's only like 50% faster than a 5080.
despite being double the
Yeah,
hardware.
and it's double the die size. And so when you see a PS6 maybe getting close to a 5090 in ray tracing, you shouldn't. That's more of an indictment of how much hardware is being wasted per millimeter squared in the
Well,
5090, which is
I
really an
think
AI
Nvidia's
card, than I think it is like, oh, this is incredible that AMD managed to give us something like 4 times faster, 8 times faster than last gen. It's just Nvidia's, and so that's my question about the 6090 is, will Nvidia even care? Like, are they going to solve the CPU overhead issue thing? Because if they don't, they're going to lose by default. But perhaps they don't care because the 5090 already wastes so much damn silicon not giving you frames that I guess we'll see. I would assume they would have to fix this. So like this would be the number one thing you fix when you go to the
well,
next architecture.
I think Nvidia and like I'm speculating, so I apologize, Nvidia or whatnot, if I'm misrepresenting your products, but I feel like they've always intentionally bottlenecked their biggest card on memory bandwidth,
But not
because
this
if
time. This
you
time they've double the bandwidth of the 4090. And the thing is 30% faster. I mean, it's a complete
well, is
joke.
it double the bandwidth over the 5080? What's the bandwidth difference
Oh
between the
yeah, I mean
5080 and the
it's it's
5090?
it's it's well,
Uh,
it's 512-bit versus 256, so it's like 80% more, or
okay,
something.
yeah, I was gonna
So,
say
but think
because I
about that.
felt like
We're talking about double the CUDA cores, and we're also talking about almost double the bandwidth, and they're like 50% more performance. It's a waste. This is not meant for gaming. This is not a
yeah, I'm
gaming
just
card.
yeah, you're right. 5080 to 5090, 960 memory bandwidth versus 1792. So that can't be memory bandwidth. It's got to be CPU bottlenecked. Oddly enough, like I'm just trying
I,
to
I
think of
don't I don't know, but I do wonder if there's a part of this where it is CPU bottlenecked, and they have to fix this with the 6090.
well, like the 5090 might keep getting faster with each GPU that
But
comes
to answer,
out.
it is not just CPU. And here's how I can tell you: I can look at the Borderlands results. It is almost twice as fast as the 5080 actually in 4K in Borderlands 4. So maybe it is. Maybe it is the CPU.
Yeah, it might be the CPU. Then you end up with a scenario where you have the 4090, and why give sorry the 5090? Why give the 5080 Ti? Why create that card with 15,000 shaders instead of 10,000 shaders,
Or
right?
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, or whatever. Why not have that? Why is it more than twice as big of a GPU as the 5080? It's the biggest gap ever
Oh
between
yeah.
the top tier and the card down. But they were like it's CPU bottlenecked anyways,
Maybe that's what
right?
they
Like
said. That
yeah,
so that's again what I wonder with the 6090 is they have to fix this. They absolutely do, because I mean, unless AMD runs into some other thing that bottlenecks it, but
but
AMD is
I don't
going
know if
to
they can.
you.
I'm just thinking.
I mean, they would have to do what AMD did, a hardware solution that isn't in the previous generations.
But then if they do, like it's going to disrupt their entire product line. Like their big thing is their mix between mobile, desktop. They're flirting with ARM,
Mhm.
right? So they have all of this relationship with ARM. They need low power, lightweight. And a lot of the reasons they're winning designs in that space is because of the low power consumption of not having as big of a hardware
Well, then it's going to
scheduler,
become
right?
with like Intel with their Ring bus, where it holds back all of their designs, and they just need to move beyond it eventually. I mean, I'm just because I'm sorry, like the AT0 and RDNA 5 goes to I think up to like 192 or 200 or whatever compute units from 64 and RDNA 4. They're going to crush the 6090. And
Yeah.
we went from 1080p to 1440p, and that bailed them out. And then we went to 4K, and that bailed them out. They tried to bail out Ampere by saying you should game in 8K. No one bought 8K displays. And 4K 240 is becoming ubiquitous now with enthusiasts. So I'm like, my 4K 240 display was $700. That's less than Dan's and it's OLED. That's $100 cheaper than Dan's 4K 144 hertz display that's IPS that he got just 3 years ago. By the time we get to when these launch, 4K 240 OLED is going to be like $500. Everyone's going to have it, and the
Yeah.
question will not be, can you run 16K? So, I mean, we'll
Yeah. No
see.
one's, yeah. This is, it's interesting. It's interesting speculating on hardware this way. I'm just,
And again, it's so fun. In Borderlands, the 5090 is double the performance of the 5080 almost. And it's
yeah.
like, yeah, and there it is. You have to be below 60 frames to not have the CPU overhead issue affecting this.
Yeah. Yeah. This
Like,
is,
were it to be below 300 frames, it'd be fine. But we're talking about 60 is where it starts showing up. NVIDIA can't just rest on their laurels, because you see like Zen 1 launched, and honestly, Zen 1 didn't make a huge dent.
Yeah.
And if that's RDNA 4, and this is where everyone's like, oh, Nvidia is so dominant now, blah blah blah. Like, but if they completely stay on the course they seem to be on, with giving you 8 GB at the bottom and having I mean, really, the bottom doesn't have enough RAM, the top can't hit high enough frame rates. If they do that
Yeah.
one more gen, and then it's a gen where AMD's sharing components with consoles, I'm just saying, this is like when they could start to get slapped pretty hard. And no,
The problem.
John Petty Research will say they have 80%, 90% market share, but those will not be to gamers. And then that's when the devs will focus more on AMD. I'm saying in gaming circles, that is where it could start to become a problem.
You see, Nvidia, right? Like, I don't know, they have a ton of mind share. And they do a lot of really really good work. They do a ton of engineering. They have all the, like, there's always papers, there's developers, they're making a lot of integrations and stuff. That's going to be really hard to break, and AMD doesn't have the same reach, right? It's just not as it doesn't have as many lines of communication open and whatnot. And they've done a ridiculously good job with engineering. And probably one of the most hopeful things for them is their partnerships with Microsoft and Sony. Now they've amplified that. Then, and a lot of their partners have realized that they would rather work with AMD.
Mm-hmm.
I think it took them a long time to realize that, some of them, but they were like, oh, well, in a situation where I can create my own ecosystem, the flexibility to do whatever, if I have to choose a partner, I'm going to choose this one over this one. And then they got more open. Like, well, Sony is like, yeah, Nvidia is this huge entity, but we are as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we are more capable of utilizing this our space than.
Yeah, we don't want to be dictated to by Nvidia. We would like to have someone that feels more like a partner, is probably what that decision was as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we want to be able to be free of this, because otherwise we're going to be trapped too. If we stop sharing our information, if we don't share information with AMD, create open initiatives, have this integrated into engines and dev cycles. And I know I said ages ago to you that too, like, with engine aggregation, as engines get more aggregated and software gets more integrated into engine, I've seen in my life uh, tools that were outside of engine tools be completely destroyed by in engine tools
Mm-hmm.
over and over again. As engines got more powerful, we saw more and more tools inside of the engine instead of being an outside thing that you pull in. And AMD's best shot is when everything's in engine, because then there'll be more of a path to optimization. Like the relationship Nvidia's had with Adobe, let's say, for forever has destroyed Radeon, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
in
In
terms
that
of
market, yeah.
as a viable option for anyone that does a mixed workload between gaming and whatever, any kind of creation whatsoever. The relationship Nvidia has with Adobe has, and it's not a hardware thing at all. That if all of Adobe tomorrow had the optimization pass to equally utilize compute on Radeon, then it would be the same situation. Equivalent cards would match equivalent cards on Nvidia,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not the case. Nvidia cards punch way above their AMD counterpoints on that, and you see really weird things like Premiere favors. Maybe I'm speculating wrong, but Premiere favors Nvidia so heavily, but then DaVinci Resolve doesn't. So if you run DaVinci Resolve, it runs ridiculously well on both Radeon and Nvidia cards, but if you run Premiere, it doesn't. So you have these weird situations where when the software ecosystem isn't as skewed, it becomes viable, but then to use an alternative, but because currently we're so dependent on certain workloads and a lot of software is so optimized, so heavily optimized for Nvidia, it's very hard for AMD to come into that space. We saw it first, like I'd say the initial battle was with what streaming. When streaming started popping off, like getting big, then when Nvidia had its shadow play, and AMD for like 3 years had no proper alternative,
Yeah.
and then when it did, it was the compression was way worse and stuff like that. And then you end up with this subset of streamers bad mouthing Radeon products, and it isn't because there isn't enough good hardware in Radeon to do that. It's a software adaptation and ecosystem issue, and AMD needs to improve on all of these fronts to make hardware their hardware perform as good as it's capable of. I think they have absolutely amazing engineers, to be perfectly honest with you. All of these companies, AMD, Nvidia, even Intel, they all have really, really amazing engineers. And like, it's so hard because you listen to like tech YouTubers and whatnot, and they always have like car references for like trying to compare when one vendor is that. But it's like the problem is the gas. Like, software ecosystems on hardware is the only space where you can literally just make a gas that runs slower on some cars. That's
Yeah.
the equivalent, right? It's like, well, this brand of gas, they actually just always run 30% slower on these cars. And it might not be malicious. It might just be
Sometimes
a
it is
lack
though,
of.
but yeah.
I don't want to speculate that way. I'm not looking to make hateful comments, but it can just be that there's no incentive to try to make it optimize on that particular hardware. So, and it's just hardware and software in a PC ecosystem where we're writing software for it. It's just a different space in terms of what things are capable of.
All right. I have two more questions. I've had to ask quite a few because this always would go on quite long, but I think this would be a good couple to round out. So Nolan and AI Bud Light 999, I combined them right in. They say with Tom's recent leak that the PS6 will have at least 30 gigabytes of RAM unified. How do you feel that the upcoming super GPUs, or I guess any future GPUs for that matter, with 18 to 24 gigabytes of RAM, will hold up in the long term? Will 18 gigabyte GPUs become the new 8 gigabytes in the PS6 era?
I guess I wanted to clarify this because I feel like the RAM discussion is usually where I looked stupid on the past broken silicons, but I feel like the biggest issue is RAM is boring as long as you have enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how I feel about RAM. Like I've worked on a lot of console ecosystems, mobile ecosystems where RAM multiplied and we always just filled what we had. So I always saw that. But RAM is really boring as long as you have enough. So the situation we're coming into right now is we do not have enough,
Mm-hmm.
and we still have commercial products being sold that don't have enough RAM. And consoles push that standard of RAM up 10 years ago now, and we still haven't accepted the console standards of RAM. That the PS4 had what 16, so 8 gigs of RAM.
It had 8, but then it had another like
8.
256 megabytes for background.
Yeah, so it had 8 gig.
The PS4 Pro had 9 gigabytes total.
Yes, and then we have didn't the Xbox One X have 12?
Yes, the Xbox One X had 12. Now we're at 16. I think technically the PS5 Pro is like 17 or something, you know?
Yeah, when they bother to. So, anyways, we're at super old console standards in terms of RAM with some GPUs on the market. And I see this all the time. Like, even just my desire to work on a 3070 laptop. So, my 3070 laptop has 8 gigabytes of RAM. And then I am limited by what I am capable to work on. Mm-hmm. So there's some things that I want to work on in an evening, and I'll start like load a level and whatnot. And it's just crashing, right? And I'm like, well, I'm not doing that level. I'm sorry. I can't do it on my laptop, on my couch, watching this with my wife. So I'm just going to pick something different to work on. So you outright have hit that RAM limit. The scalability is already lowered like crazy and unreal. I can't get any more. I'm out of RAM. And I'm like, great, I have to just do this on my desktop some other time because I have workloads that exceed this. So it sucks because the only context that I currently personally encounter it is in laptops when I have to work on laptops.
It's a huge issue in NVIDIA laptops, that is.
Well, it's like all of the equivalent GPUs from Nvidia, their laptop counterparts have less RAM than their desktop counterparts. Mm-hmm. So developers hit this on most laptops that they end up working on. And often developers have both. They'll have a desktop and they have a laptop. You know, if they have to go to meetings or go around, there's things that they want to do on the go and whatnot. And it's frustrating. So we need more RAM in all of these devices, and RAM isn't as expensive as you'd think.
It's gotten really cheap lately. Yeah.
I think PlayStation has to set the standard to like, if they could set it to 32 gigs next gen, I think everyone would be so happy. They would just be so happy.
So you think 30 for the desktop, I call it that, the PS6 desktop, and 24 for the handheld would be enough?
Yeah, well, you just lower your textures, right? Like so, and you wouldn't see them anymore at that resolution, anyways. The only problem is if it's a device that's expected to dock, right? So if you have a device so you dock, then all of a sudden that the scaled experience, like anyone who had the Vita TV, I don't know if you remember.
Oh, I do, and it can't even run Netflix. It's the Sony doesn't want this to sell well TV. Yeah.
Yeah, this little device that hooks up to your TV.
The concept is really cool. I mean,
it did not scale well with resolution. Like the Vita looks great. It's 540p little handheld screen. Looked great. You can still I have a Vita. I turn it on every once in a while. I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Like this device is cool. It punches above its weight. And then or like the PSP. Right, like you play a game on the PSP, you're like, this looks like
amazing. 240p, right, or something tiny.
And then you pop. They had the display out on the 2000 series of it. You hook it up to a TV, you're like, ooh, this does not scale well. Like it does not scale well at all. So the risk with the PlayStation handheld is that it will hook up to TVs and have a lesser scaled experience in
But as
that
long as it's
context.
1080p, again, that's why it's like we're in an era where I just think that you're at the minimum where it's not going to look garbage.
Well, it's going to be a different era because it's not going to be 1080p. It's going to be scaled to whatever resolution your display is, right? Because of
Sure, 1080p to
DLSS.
4K looks good though.
Well, we're seeing this with the Switch already, right? Like Switch 2. Switch 2 is this scenario coming into place. And what's happening is some games have DLSS support and some games do not. And it's noticeable because you can fill up the resolution of your display much more easily when you have this scaler in place.
Call me crazy. I think Sony will be smart enough to actually use the modern features. And so would Microsoft because they're not Nintendo. This is where you get a little bit of the Nintendo bash. I'm like, well, I don't know. Nintendo does Nintendo things sometimes. What do you want me to say?
Well, I think the reason Nintendo does Nintendo things in that particular context is because so many of their own games run on their own engine.
Yes. Well, yeah, but that's them. That's pretty unique. I mean,
but they have different engines. So like ARMS and Mario Kart would be a different engine than Donkey Kong Bonanza and Mario Odyssey. So you have this scenario where you have engine splits for certain games. So then if they want to put something like DLSS in their engine, they have to do it over and over and over again in these different engines that they've done on a per game basis. So I don't know. I guess I don't think of it as like a Nintendo problem. It's like that they have been in this game to engine building scenario for so long. You know what I mean? That's different. Whereas like most other studios, like I guess it's Anvil and Snowdrop, right? With Ubisoft, with it's mostly Frostbite. With that, they just do the patching in of features into those engines once, and they're good to go. But it's going to be slower on Nintendo's side because they have to do it on a per engine basis, and they have teams that run various engines.
But so again, though, like, how do you think 24 gigabytes for like the 5080 Super and 18 for the 5070 will age? And what if the consoles all like have at least around 30 gigabytes or more within reason? What do you think is the new 8 gigabytes? Because I think
it's 24 is fine. I think 16's going to be the hard cutoff.
And like so 16 will probably be fine though, but 12 will be like 6 gigabytes now. And
yeah, I think that we're already seeing that. Like we're already seeing some games exceed 10, right? Like 8 is happening in almost all games if you do the settings
bad.
right.
Yeah.
Like a modern, if you do this, if you set the settings in a way, you can make almost all games exceed 8 gigabytes, right? But or the engine just stops rendering things. Like some engines won't hit you performance wise, but it just doesn't draw the assets. So you end up with some things just not having textures on them and various things, or shadow maps not drawing, or things like that. But on I do think 16 gigs will be mostly fine. I think that we're 2 years away from 16 gigs having some games exceed.
Mm-hmm.
That's my guess. It's my like wild speculation is in 2 years, we're going to see some games exceed 16 gigabytes of VRAM. We might have better engine protocols at that point for making it that not tank your frame rate in the same way. So it might be more, like just randomly not drawing assets or whatnot that some engines do. But we're going to start seeing some issues with 16 gigabytes. I think 24 gigs is safe. I think 12 is going to be borderline. 16 is going to be mostly okay. 24 is going to be completely safe for the foreseeable future.
And when you say 16 gigabytes is kind of the new 8 gigabytes, just to be clear though, you're kind of like saying the new 8 gigabytes 5 years ago, like mostly fine at all times, even in 4K. But there's like one game that you might have to turn on DLSS to play it in 4K. We're not talking about 8 gigabytes now, like in 2 years.
No. I'm not talking about 8 gigabytes now. I'm just saying we'll start seeing some things exceed it. That's it. And 90% of games won't. 95% probably won't. You're going to start seeing individual games head out the gates that exceed it.
Yeah.
In years, in a couple years. I'm saying like in 2 years, we're going to see this. I'm saying like 90% of games, 80 to 90% of modern AAA games exceed 8 gigabytes with some setting configuration now, right? Some of those, I'd say 10 to 20% exceed 10 gigabytes already. Almost nothing exceeds 12 at this point in time. Almost nothing at all exceeds 12 gigabytes, but unless you turn on severe ray tracing.
Exactly, and then it'll hit 20 like nothing. But that's the funny thing is I also think that the cascade of how much it will matter because of how much of the engine itself is built into the VRAM buffer is going to be even more surprising to people. Like, for example, in 2020, if you had an 8 gigabyte card, you're generally fine no matter what. There's a couple games where you have to turn down settings in 4K. Okay. But generally speaking, 6 GB back then pretty much can do almost any resolution. 4 GB was even kind of enough for 1440p half of the time. It wasn't until like the
Yeah.
6500 XT came out in 22 where we were like, okay, 4 is even limited to 1080p. I mean, we're already seeing games right now where 8 GB cards require the lowest settings for 1080p, and even then there's some stuttering. Like the hardware and box
Yeah.
testing on this has been brutal. And so I just think it's
Yeah.
the second we get to next gen, and it's like take these games that are having trouble fitting 1080p low into an 8 GB card, add an LLM, add ray tracing. I think what you're going to see is 16 is like 8 GB in 2020,
Yeah.
but eight gigabytes is going to be like one. Like it's just
Unless
that doesn't run. 10 GB doesn't run. It's going to be that 10 GB barely runs. I think it's going to be exponentially worse the lower you go, though, right? Because of how much is just going to be not even the textures.
Well, I'm curious how I know that like we're looking into neural texture rendering and stuff like that, but it might get to be the case that there becomes a legitimate reason that something that uses a lot of memory now does not use as much memory in the future. That would be the only unless. Like, let's say that one of the steps for developers in the future is literally you make all your high res textures, you train the engine on those textures, and then it makes like 10 pixel versions of those textures, and then it knows it has the cue to make the big texture from the little texture in real time as it goes, right? Like, and then you have a smart system that's only generating the appropriate textures. We might find some solution. Maybe it doesn't work like maybe there's the bottleneck, or it still has to be stored somewhere, unless we do it in whatever. Let's say we do it in the past where it's just rendering it already, mapped and properly aligned in that DLSS pass to the screen. Like, maybe things are way heavier than they need to be right now, and we haven't figured out a way to make it more optimal. I don't know.
Has
I
that
just
ever
there's
been
a part
true,
of
though? I mean, has it ever been we get to the next gen, and I'm sure there's some things that are made more optimal, but I can't think of a time where they're like, and then we never needed to use it for anything else. Like, I feel like all the things they're
no.
thinking of
There's always
doing
something.
is they're going to fill that stuff up fast.
I'm saying like that's the only thing I could think of that's theoretically possible. Otherwise, we're just going to need more and more
Yeah.
RAM. Like, if it doesn't end up working that way, that we have, like, to be fair, Oodle and Kraken texture compression decompression libraries are the only reason that game stabilized in size.
Mhm. And think about that too. We're already using all that compression. So whenever they talk about all this new AI compression stuff, they're starting from zero. We're not at zero with Oodle and
No, we're not
stuff.
at
So they're
zero.
not going to get
Well,
remotely
you
as
see
much as
this
they
with
say.
you see this with PS4 games versus PS5 games, where literally the download is double the size on the PS4 game. The
Mhm.
PS4 game is like a 50 gig download versus
Sure.
25 gig download on the PS5 because it uses Oodle and Kraken compression decompression libraries. So
From that
there's
perspective, I guess, yeah, there could be situations where that happens. But yeah, something like
yeah, I
that
mean
happens that
it's
saves
often
memory.
still decompressing in engine and stored in memory.
Okay.
So it's really finding a way to one of the fun things when I used to teach college courses to students was just open an image in Photoshop, because people see like a PSD and they think it's 100 megs, right? And that's how much RAM it's using. But one of the things that shows you just in Photoshop with an image, if you look in the bottom left hand corner, is it shows you the name, the file size when it's compressed and stored away, and right next to it, it shows how much that image is using up in physical RAM at that point in time. So you'll have like 100 megabyte image, and then that same image, it just says 100 megabytes in the bottom left hand corner, and beside it, it'll say 1.7 gigabytes for that one image. In the difference between when it's collapsed and stored away as a compressed file, and when it's open and operational in RAM, right? And that's just one image you're playing with. Now, there's some things that are happening in that image that are more CPU bound, like it's holding history states for that image, which will increase the amount of RAM that it has. But it's just an interesting operation to see that there's a difference between when an object is stored versus when it's held in RAM. And I think it opens a lot of eyes sometimes to just play around with things like this and show people how computers work with files or hardware. It's different than we'd think, but like I'm just saying that we saw a big difference with PS5 in terms of Oodle Kraken compression, and then we see there could be some other paradigm that comes forward that's even better at that we're just not aware of yet. So yeah. but then we'll want to make them look even better. We'll want even better looking
That's what I'm
textures.
saying.
That's the funny thing with mesh shaders, right? So mesh shaders theoretically would let you run the geometry 10 times faster. But what do we do with it immediately? We have 10 times more complex geometry. We see the window and we don't use it for 10 times the performance. We use it for 10 times the geometry.
So yeah,
Right?
yeah. Again,
That's
16 is going to be the new 8, but I do not think that 8 is going to be the new 4. It's going to be the new 1 because it's just we're out. I mean, we're out, guys. All right, final question. I'm not even going to read the actual write up for it. I'm just going to blatantly. I'm just because I've been thinking about this. Do you think they will use frame gen a lot in the next gen console games?
oh,
Because personally, I really hope they don't.
I hope they don't too. Um, I don't like. I don't love frame gen, and I know everyone's allowed their opinions on it. Some people just see smoothness up and they like it, but I guess I've spent too much time animating and drawing and things that I told you. I talked about this with you last time, but like I thought that the frame generation in Spider-Man, Insomniac Spider-Man,
Mm-hmm.
killed his run cycle because it just adds weird
It
frames
does.
that ruin the emphasis of what the frames were trying to do. Frame gen in Cyberpunk has the whole scene, but the it doesn't have enough data to know what's under the car moving this way. So then you end up with the lines of the road sometimes moving the wrong
And they've
way in the
improved it a
frame.
lot since then, but
They
still, I
have.
just anytime I try it, it is not impressed. And I tried it
I
recently
turn
on
it
Battlefield 6.
off.
I think it's terrible.
Yeah, I personally I get too many weirdness like aspects of like there's too many things that look off and weird. So I'm not particularly in love. And the big thing is I personally just feel like we feel latency way more. So getting raw frames is more important to the game than it is to get um, resolution. Sorry, to get frames like fake frames. It's like the same reason I've never liked TV interpolation either, right? Like it's another fake frames you get if you have your interpolation on your TV.
Mm. Yeah.
Then it's generating weird fake frames between everything, and then people think it causes the soap opera effect. But I turn
So
it
you
off
won't
when
want to. Your game, you won't want to put
I
frame gen into the
I
PS6
don't want
line.
to put frame gen. I would use
Sure.
DLSS and I'd
Yeah,
use
I would.
FSR for, and I would be interested in reconstruction and whatnot. But I'm personally not that interested in um, I would rather get the latency by trying to get as many frames as possible. If I had complete control of everything, and then that I would be willing to make
I
concessions
could see them
for
doing it
that.
a little bit in the handheld to go from 30 to 60 because the CPU is weaker. You could maybe see some of that in it on a small screen,
Yeah,
but
and laptops too. Like any small display where artifacts are less noticeable, then there's more of a leeway for it, right? To fill the refresh of the display. The second that the screen I think is above 27 inches, I think that the artifacts are bigger than the gains.
this is the interesting thing too because you could say I think a lot of people are assuming they're going to use frame gen a ton in the PS6 and Xbox Magnus, and I'm sure some game will, but I will
Yeah.
say, guys, they could be doing it now. I mean, AMD's frame generation supposedly works great even on Nvidia GPUs with FSR 3.1, let alone 4. So I will say that we still don't see frame gen being used in almost any game on PS5 and Xbox Series X, and because
There's a few that shipped with it. There's Black Myth Wukong did, and a couple other games where they weren't hitting high enough frame rates on their own, so they just
they decided
had
to,
to.
yeah. But
They
I will
decided
say,
to.
I suspect it won't become the standard because their Battlefield 6 doesn't do it. So there's a lot of
Yeah,
devs that seem to just not want to do it, and they could be using it now. Everyone could use it right now if they wanted to.
yeah, yeah. I mean, FSR one's available in most formats, like on consoles and whatnot, and then on PC. It's not such a hard thing to turn on. So I don't know. It's more just I do think maybe there would be a point in time where the upscaling on it's so good, the what it's actually guessing and interpreting will get so good that maybe my position will change on that. So I'll leave it up to
Sure.
that. But it would have to
My
it would have
position
to
has
have more.
changed on DLSS. I mean, it was terrible at first, and then it became good. But I think it's going to take a lot to get my mind to change on frame gen.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I think that like if the algorithms get smarter about maximizing the animator's intent, and there might be a way that you can fully train it on that. It's possible that because in animation terms, you usually have the when an animation starts versus when you have like the I don't even know how to I don't know. My brain's not putting the words together right now, but you have the points of emphasis, you have the keyframes, you have the in betweens, right? And then there's areas where there are intentional holds on animation, and it seems to add in betweens to places where it should be not. And if we can create a smart AI algorithm that properly accommodates that as it's generating frames that smooth out the entire like experience of the game, but understand all the artistic intent along with it, I think then maybe we have a good there could be something good there, but it would have to train its models differently. It would be much more based on um, what the maximizing artistic intent rather than just finding the space between two things.
Bryan, thank you for joining me again today. He is you are the art director at Massive Damage
Yes.
Inc. Please tell everybody, besides, of course, Googling Massive Damage Inc. and all of your games, like where they can find you.
Literally just Google my name. I'm lucky. My last name's Heemskerk. Believe I am the most popular person with my name, Bryan Heemskerk. So if you Google me, you'll find me. You'll find art that I've done. You'll find me in every capacity. Feel free to reach out. There's one question I just wanted to touch on before we wrapped up,
Okay.
because someone was asking about Xbox losing its status
Okay.
and what I feel about that. And just right before we wrap up, I think it's a
Yeah, I mean,
terrible
if you have something, go.
I Xbox has done more for indies, I think, and smaller scale studios than I think anyone can recognize. And I guess I'm going to take a moment to take a shout out to ID at Xbox and the Xbox program, because I know so many games. I know game developers, I have friends that their game would have been dead and out of money and not funded if it wasn't for Xbox programs. Indie games, like I tons of indie studios, their ID at Xbox program that kind of like started with Castle Crushers and Meat Boy. I know it supported games like Spiritfarer and like lots of other games that when I've talked to developers, I know Coco Cucumber and other studios that have had so much funding from that. So to lose Xbox as a part of this is scary to me, because they've taken a lot of gambles and funded a lot of really interesting games that wouldn't have got a pass otherwise. Sony and Nintendo do not fund games the way that Microsoft has historically. So there's a part of me that's really scared about an Xbox less future and a diminished Xbox status, and it not having the programs to send the support that it does. Because as far as being forward thinking with taking risks on ideas, maybe not in the AAA space as much. The AAA is a different beast where they bought studios and other things, but in just funding indie studios for just whatever their Game Pass programs or idea at Xbox programs, things like that, has been. I know like several of big indie games that were smash hits that were at the brink of bankruptcy if it wasn't for some idea at Xbox program mid development, and then they came out and they sold like gangbusters and everyone loved that indie game. But we need more things like that in this space. People taking risks on small games and silly game ideas. So I guess that's my personal thing. That's my biggest fear from years of going to
It's just less
conferences
funding for games in general.
and like just weird games that could fall on their face, that just are kooky and a little interesting. Microsoft's funded a ton of games like that, where it's not whatever a Skyrim or something big. They're they're more quiet on the indie front, for like people don't think about them as much when they talk in the gaming space. But if you were a game developer and you've been to GDC, you've been to conferences, you've been to this, Xbox has been such a wonderful and big presence in those spaces for so many games. I'm not talking about anything that I've done even, but I've been in the room with too many developers that were saved by Xbox, and it's scary for me to think about the world without some of those games, because game development oftentimes it's hard, and then it takes a year or two longer than you thought it was going to do. And if it wasn't for programs like that, we might not have seen some of our favorite little games.
And yet they
So
killed the Hi-Fi Rush developers after a success.
well, they might have absorbed it.
But
I
see,
don't know
this
what
is where
thing.
I go. Isn't it over? Like, I think we had this discussion last time
I
where it's like,
know.
I mean, what about the Perfect Dark devs gone? What about? I think this is a conversation that we should have had 3 years ago, and we probably did, knowing me and you. But like,
Yeah,
they killed successful game studios, and like,
That's more double A, triple A. I guess I was referring in this particular context purely the indie space. Like double A and triple A, Tango Gameworks, that some games just are amazing, beautiful things that don't make their money back. And that's a sad thing. Like my favorite example of this forever is Clover. Okami, Beautiful Joe, and God Hand. You had this dev making, there was an offshoot of Capcom making some of the most critically acclaimed games that did not sell very well. Everyone who played them loved them, but they didn't sell to that many people. I mean, luckily in our case, they left and they formed Platinum, and then we got a different array of fun games that sprung off of that. But you have a lot of situations where most of my favorite games though, like I guess I'm just weird in the sense that so many of my favorite games are 70 out of 100 games, but the type where for 50% or 40% of the audience it's 100 out of 100, and for 50% of the audience it's 30 or 40 out of 100, and you end up getting a 70 game, right? That's just hit or miss with gamers versus like a very safe 70 where it's like everyone just thought it was somewhat okay, not mediocre. There's different ways to hit these marks. You can make a game that so perfectly targets an audience that it's going to miss a bunch of other audiences. That's a really fun space, but the problem is just getting funding and support for some of these games. So if I hope Xbox doesn't drop out of the ring entirely in this space, because I haven't seen enough of that from Nintendo and Sony to make up for it. So it's a big fear in terms of just seeing the dearth of range in games. I really want to see a lot of amazing, interesting games. I want to see ones that push technological limits, but I also want them to push conceptual limits. And I guess I'm just want to see more of that in that space. So, anyways, I saw the question on the list and I had the answer in my head. And then when we didn't get to it, I wanted to touch on that one particularly because it's probably my biggest fear in losing Xbox.
Yeah, I would just hope that they actually start funding games again, because I think they all need to. Sony did for the PS4 and then seems to not care much anymore. But that's what I would say is, I just want more games to get funded, and I don't want more consolidation. We don't need Sony to own Bungie. We don't need Microsoft to own Call of Duty, and then as a result actually make less games. So I just hope more people fund games, and I think that's probably what Microsoft should be doing, so
I guess we can wrap up here. I just wanted to touch on that before.
No, that's fine. But if you want to fund an indie game, make sure you look at the links in the description. And oh my God, I almost had the perfect transition, but I'm so tired. And go to the link to Radiant Starlets that Bryan is making. Otherwise, all their links will be in the description. You can find Bryan and the other stuff Bryan is working on. Make sure you're subscribed to Broken Silicon on your podcast app of choice. Give us a review. Subscribe to Moore's Law on YouTube. Ring the bell button. Give us a like on this. Give us hype points on this. I don't know what other system YouTube's added by now to make our life harder, but hype it, like it, bell button. What more could they add? Do all of it. Comment. And, if you really want to support us on Patreon, where we can cut through worrying about hype points. And you'll get access to exclusive podcasts and be able to ask guests like Bryan here questions. Again, Bryan, thank you for giving me so much of your time. And everybody, if you made it this far, for giving me all of your time listening. Have a good rest of the week, everybody.
Take care.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carbon Cry and Kerry No Sugata as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Kerry No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and John Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong, we love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guests questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Aegis, Daniel D, Nicholas, Aaron Close, Jan Rauner, Toka, MJB1, Daniel Hyde, GZ Ziggy, SNAS Chalmers, Jim Ferriero, Velcome Malev, Compressed AI Blocks, Jensen Wang, Gregory Acker, Sarcastro, Chris Rich, Evan Dingle, Hal Buma, Shredbird, Sammy Malas, Curry King 3, Chrislin Thenos, The Boss Haas, Tommy, Jonathan, Jake223, Jake Martin, Zlicky, Amiable Chief, Gamers Unite, I Should, Meat and Pork, Ian Clifford, Tim Robb, Travis Gooding, Zutsu Taylor, Mads, Patty Cakes, Greg, Michael McGee, Stephen Coates, Mark Mitchell, James Anderson, Win Wing, Mark Raidmaker, Coal Addict, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, Cameron, Michelle Pell, Hexapuma, Teak Autumn, Reginald Ari, Windstar, Little Germany, James I. Raider, Shay, Milton, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, Stephen Dick, Mackey, Justin Bussell, Austin Haggerty, Jofit, John Swin, Brian Scanlon, Hardland, Joseph Kelly, Jensen Angima, Slushbob, Brian Wright, Sisyphos 7771, The Forbidden Juice, RB Racer, Thalo215, Alex Vega, Michael Cozy, Crystal Joe, Solarized 80, Elbergun, Kikum, Sprutnik, Brian P, Hootdat42, Cornster 671, Penta Winta, State Farm Snake, Matthew Cassells, Hal Richard, Omega Doge, Hugo Ender Kiwi, Mr. Tiger, John Wick Boomstick, Penguins Love AI, Porcelain Oats, Nixus Mania AI, Soldiers 789, Bespoke exclamation point, Smash Axley, Karim El Masri, Daniel Martinagano, Fred Berger, Rahil Chi Bulls, Kevin Kuntz, Manolis Ragkusis, Armand Bakatura, Jonathan Harris, Colin Reichel, Elusive Man, Kainush Kagani, Zubar Ahmed, Johnny Retrans, Bjorn Toft, Josh, Abigail Schiff, and Angel of Cake. And of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.